Welcome to another episode of OG55. We got Slimer, Jay, Sheer, and Mr. Seymour Duck. We are doing part 2 to that Disney Adults Wisecrack video. We had a great reception from part 1. We want to dive into part 2. Thank you for watching OG55. Here we go. Welcome aboard, everybody, to another episode of OG55. I have a fantastic panel with me today. We got Slimer, Jay Sheer, and Mr. Seymour Duck. Slimer, I'm going to start with you, brother. Where can everybody find you on social media, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on X at SlimeSquare84, and you can find me right here on OrangeGrow55. And I got to say, I really enjoyed the first one we did with our friends George Italiano and Mr. Webba. They offered a lot of really great insights. And I'm really glad to have an opportunity here to get the perspective of these two gentlemen. I think that they're going to bring a lot of really interesting insights to the table. So let's do Disney Adults.
Absolutely. Mr. Jay Sheer, welcome back, sir. Right? We've been having a lot of Jay Sheer on lately. I love it. I
love it too, man. It's been so fun. Thanks for having me on again. Always a pleasure. This is going to be a really interesting topic, so that's really fun. Thanks, Slimer, for going after it with this. And if you want to find me anywhere, you can find me right here on YouTube, How Stories Work with Jay Sheer, usually breaking down films. You know, storytelling has a large component of me having the spiritual beliefs that I have. So as we talk about Disney, is it a religion? Is there a Disney adults religion component to it? Slimer started talking about this before we started recording, but storytelling is a big component of that, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit more. But yeah, you can find me on How Stories Work with Jay Sheer, breaking down stories, and you can also find me right here on Orange Grove 55 with the Story Geek Show.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, with all my special access, I pray to the Disney flywheel every night. In Walt's name, we pray amen, right? Mr. Seymour Duck, another gentleman with a whole lot of special access. How you doing, Mr. Seymour Duck?
I'm doing pretty good. Actually disappointed with my Uber Eats, but I'm doing pretty good.
You're disappointed in your Uber Eats guy, huh? Yeah, you texted me. That's pretty funny. That was a pretty funny
I got
story.
my drink, and it's like diluted a bit water. I was just disappointed. And it was like half full. I'm just like...
Oh, my gosh. Well, hopefully we make up for it with a great show today. Mr. Duck, where can everybody find you on social media, sir?
Oh, yeah. You can find me at mrduck.social with all my social media links to Threads, Instagram, and X.
There he is, Mr. Seymour Duck. Here we go. Now, this is pretty...
You can almost bet that when Jay and I were talking, he had his microphone muted and he was slurping on that soda with a disappointed look on his face.
Absolutely. I'm gonna be slurping on this soda the whole time. So
absolutely. So this is part 2 of the Disney Adult series over here on Wisecrack. Make sure you follow and subscribe to Wisecrack. Great content over there. If you haven't checked out part 1 of this reaction, check it out. It was just like a week ago. We just did it, so pretty recently. But gentlemen, you know how we do here on OG55. We're gonna play the video. Tell me to stop along the way. We're gonna react to it. Here we go.
This video is brought to you by Full Sail University. What's up, guys? Michael here, and today I'm ready to inspire a niche group of otherwise charming adults to write me ever more elaborate death threats. Welcome to part 2 of our exploration of Disney Adults.
Not Disney Adults,
Mouse
no,
ears
never.
are part
Oh,
of
never.
lifestyle, and reciting Hakuna Matata each morning is mandatory. Last time we looked at the scholarly debate over how we talk about fandoms like Disney and whether or not they qualify as religion. And despite the fact that it might make some scholars and all Disney adults very, very mad at us, we're going to take it a step further today. We're going to examine the evidence for Disney operating as a religion. That means looking at the nuts and bolts of how the hypothetical Church of Mickey Mouse works and what its spiritual doctrine might entail. So buckle up for part 2 of this Wisecrack edition on Disney adults. Is Disney a religion? But before we get into it, I want to shout out this video sponsor, Full Sail University.
All right, hold on one sec. I'm sorry, Wisecrack, but we're gonna fast forward the commercial. But definitely full support to the university. Check them out if you would like to.
Adults inspired this video series in the first place. Well, she's far from the first person to explore the possibility that Disney might constitute a modern-day religion. Way back in 1934, author E.M. Forster went so far as to argue that Mickey is everybody's god. Meanwhile, scholar Richard Fogelsong called Disney the Vatican with mouse ears. But in order to really determine if Disney is a full-blown faith, we first need to think about what makes something a religion to begin with.
You know, it's interesting though to kind of dive into this a little bit. There was a survey done a few years ago. I would say almost a decade now, but in terms of recognizable symbols like around the world, the Mickey Mouse, the 3-ear silhouette, was like neck and neck with the cross in terms of like recognizability worldwide. I mean, that is just insane to me. You know what I'm saying? Absolutely bonkers.
It's super crazy.
For our purposes, we're going to use anthropologist Clifford Geertz's popular definition from 1973, which outlines 5 stipulations to define religion as 1, a system of symbols, 2, about the nature of things, 3, that inculcate dispositions for behavior, 4, through ritual and cultural performance, 5, so that the conceptions held by the group are taken as real. Addressing the first piece, a system of symbols, look no further than Mickey Mouse himself, who has become a worldwide symbol of innocence. In the United States, market researchers have found he has a 97% recognition rate, making him more recognizable than Santa Claus. As cultural critic Henry Thoreau notes, the cultural iconography of Disney renders it a purveyor of innocence and family fun. He adds that through its films, parks, and endless merchandising, Disney becomes a symbol for the security and romance of the small-town America of yesteryear. From the iconic Cinderella's castle, representing enchantment and dreams coming true, to barbershop quartets strolling down Main Street, USA, Disney is rife with symbolism, not unlike that of religion. They do some of this by operating as what DePaul University professor Michael Buddy might call symbolic predators. That is, appropriating existing imagery from traditional religions. Indeed, like the sun shining over Simba's kingdom, echoes of world religions appear throughout Disney properties. Take the concept of the circle of life, which is deeply rooted in Hinduism, according to journalist Mark Pinsky, or Snow White taking a bite from an apple like you know who. Heck, Pinsky points out that in Pinocchio, when Geppetto falls to his knees to ask an undefined deity for help, a fairy appears, conveniently decked out in the Virgin Mary's trademark shade of blue.
Wow.
Still, let's be clear. Explicit references are largely absent from Disney movies. This was intentional. Disney biographer Bob Thomas...
You know, even like Disney, like adjacent IP, like Star Wars. I mean, Star Wars is... You could do a whole show on the Star Wars religious stuff. I mean, it's crazy how much Lucas pulled from religion. But he even pulled from things like the law of attraction and things like that. Like, you become what you think... Your thoughts become your reality, so to speak, right? It's a very law of attraction kind of philosophy, which is kind of interesting. So even the stuff that isn't technically, I mean, I know it is Disney, they bought it, but even the stuff that didn't originate from the Disney company sort of has echoes of that religious and sort of spiritual undertones, right? And it's interesting that Star Wars sort of has a very similar sort of like intense, to be nice, fan base, you know? So it's funny how the other religious franchise is also kind of garner a very intense sort of following as well, not just Disney. So that is kind of interesting. I don't think that's a coincidence at all.
I do think that it's an interesting discussion of iconography, though, because of the 3 that he talked about, right? He talked about essentially Hinduism in the circle of life. He talked about the apple being Adam and Eve, and then he talked about Cinderella's dress being like the same color as the Virgin Mary. I mean, there's a few things here that I feel like are really big stretches, like right off the bat, in comparing it to, like, in other words, like, why does Snow White take the apple?
She was hungry.
Yeah, it's just because she's hungry, right? Like, so the iconography of Adam and Eve, in that the apple is a representation of wanting to be like God and having godlike powers if I eat it, is actually not present in the iconography of the movie. Whereas, like, also with the Virgin Mary, it's like, just because she happens to have blue and it sparkles. I mean, it's like a little bit of a. I understand what they're trying to do, but I actually feel like it's not so much that Disney relates to current religions, although I think it does in other ways. It's that Disney has become its own religion.
Yes.
So it's an interesting thing to kind of watch out for as we talk about this.
100%, Jay, and you're right. Those are kind of stretches with the blue fairy dress, and then like the Simba stuff or Lion King stuff, and the apple. That's a stretch to me. I think more significant is the symbolism of the ears and how that mimics religion. With the symbols and all that. So, but interesting though.
Notes that Walt Disney made the strategic business decision to keep religion out of his films in order to make them marketable to the widest international audience.
Hard eyes.
And yet, there's still an argument to be made for the second qualification for religion, about the nature of things. Disney movies may not feature an explicit God figure, but many have argued that Disney effectively poached a lot of Judeo-Christian ideology while scrubbing out the actual divinity stuff. As Pinsky explained back in 2004, there is relatively little explicit Judeo-Christian symbolism or substance in 70 years of Disney's animated features, despite the frequent, almost pervasive use of a theological vocabulary. Words such as faith, believe, miracle, blessing, sacrifice, and divine.
Sure.
It seems a contradiction, portraying consistent Judeo-Christian values without sectarian or even godly context. The fruits without the roots. He points out that Disney effectively preaches the Protestant work ethic, minus the whole God thing.
But here's another thing we have to also keep in mind with this stuff. A lot of the Disney stuff, Snow White, Cinderella, Peter Pan, Alice in Wonderland, even like, the Little Mermaid, even the more modern stuff, are based on stories before. So these aren't necessarily like Disney, necessarily like a Disney created product 100%. Like these were very much pulled from stories of, even hundreds of years ago. So who knows what the intention was for the original pieces, but, in translation, does that mean Disney was sort of trying to evoke the same thing? I'm not so sure, as it is more about just kind of like interpreting that story, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? Like, is it a Disney thing, or are they just interpreting a story from hundreds of years ago and that those themes were in there already? Go ahead, Seymour. Sorry, bro.
I was going to say, I agree, because like with the Snow White and the Apple, Disney didn't create that.
Right.
That was already part of the story. And now in this video, they're trying to make it seem like that was Disney did it, but it wasn't. That was already made in. That was old, I forget what they were called, but they were old royalty-free stories that they were able to use.
Yeah, and they largely came from Judeo-Christian Europe, and at the time that those stories were written, Christianity was a much more prevalent belief system than it is in Western civilization in the year 2025. So it's really kind of hard to escape storytelling while also simultaneously escaping the influences of Judeo-Christianity, especially when it was so prevalent around at that time. And even is, even to this day, and it's not like there's any shortage of religiosity throughout the world. But, it's also one thing to take into consideration, which he hasn't mentioned, he might mention it later in the video, but the fact that we come from primarily, a Protestant background belief system here in the United States, because we come from England. Of course, we have a lot of other immigrant countries, but the majority of the population here is Protestant. So, Judeo-Christian or Israeli or background, we have some Muslim sprinkled in, but, this is a very strong monotheistic background that permeates all, like, pretty much storytelling just in general. So in order to try to separate, I think it's kind of, or to say like they're trying to influence it into the movies is kind of hard to argue, especially when we come from that religious background in of itself. So for example, like if Disney was like, let's say, an Indian company and it came from India, obviously you would see a lot of hints of Hinduism. And so that's not because they're trying to promote religiosity or they're trying to framework the company as like a pseudo religion, but more so byproduct of the fact that it comes from India, so you're a product of your surroundings. That's one of the basic, that's just like one of the fundamental observations of anthropology.
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of that stuff, like, like faith and hope and things like that, what they were talking about, a lot of that isn't exclusive to religion necessarily. I think as human beings, those kind of things are hardwired into us. where we have this core kind of understanding of like, like faith, but believing in a better tomorrow. I think that's like basic human being stuff, more or less, than exclusively religious too,
Jay, do you think that those, because what he's saying here is he's saying that, and that's a really good point. So the syntax and the semantics of the stories that Disney chooses to tell are exactly identical to the same syntax and semantics that we use for certain concepts of like divinity and of power and magic and mysticism and all the things that make, religion otherworldly are there. He's saying it's synonymous with the way that religion is kind of unfolds to, the way it unfolds to us as the reader and the believer. Is it possible to tell stories without using that framework of language and still get the same, the same morality points across, the same stories of, like how we pass knowledge down from generation to generation? A lot of those words are used interchangeably between the two. Do you think it's possible to do that, or is that necessary and just inexorable, like intrinsic to storytelling? And really what do you think about that?
That's a really good question. So before I answer that question, a couple thoughts on what we were just talking about, and then I'll answer that question a little bit more directly. One thing I think is really important to note too is that to your point, Slimer, the stories that Disney took and adapted are not adapted strictly true to the original material. So, for example, there's a really good podcast on The Little Mermaid from Revisionist History, which is the what's the guy's name? The really popular guy that wrote The Tipping Point, Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm Gladwell has a fantastic podcast, by the way, called Revisionist History, and he talks about The Little Mermaid and how Disney changed The Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid is a very, very tragic fairy tale if you read the original text. And there's a lot of people that interpret it as that the writer, I cannot remember who the writer was, but was a homosexual who was saying kind of like, I want to be a part of a different world.
Hans Christian Andersen, I believe.
Was it Hans Christian Andersen?
Yeah.
Okay. But note that Disney has removed a bunch of those things and actually brought in the Judeo-Christian sort of framework into it, right? So what's interesting to me is that the starting place for a lot of Disney stories, drawing from a legacy, so to speak, of these fairy tales, and then saying that fairy tale, to Slimer's point that he made earlier, is not really something that our collective value system adheres to right now. So I will adapt the fairy tales into what our collective value system kind of is, right? Sure. And so with Walt Disney, a lot of themes here, and I actually want to talk about this, but maybe later in the video, the changing nature of what the Disney religion actually is, because it's not the same in the 50s that it is in 2025, right? Like, it's a different set of values that guides the creation of stories, like, which we should talk about. But in this context, I think that what's really fascinating is that Disney is saying there's an Americana value, and that Americana value, to Slimer's point, is heavily influenced by Judeo-Christian values. And so we're not taking like God, or we're not taking Jesus, and we're stripping that out, but we're saying we all pretty much agree, because we were raised by our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents into this same framework of story. And so once you take those frameworks that are coming from other cultures, you integrate that into a Judeo-Christian worldview, sort of, and you remove certain elements that may or may not be like too closely tied to religions. It's a pretty powerful thing to do from a storytelling standpoint. So in direct answer to your question, Slimer, I think you can tell, and you can tell me if this is not answering your question directly, but I think you can tell lots of different stories, but the chances that those will resonate is lower if everyone doesn't agree to the same value set that they're going in to watch.
I agree. Seymour, you got anything to say on that?
Blanking here. Sorry.
All good, because the reason I asked is because I did want to add to that, Jay. And I think that what you're saying too, and this is what's really interesting about it, it probably happens more covertly, and I don't mean like in a way to like deceive, but in other words, the antithesis of overt.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that it happens like that is more of like a ground up as opposed to like a top down approach to storytelling. And the reason is because we are inculcated with the same exact values in our collective value system here in the Western world, as opposed to, Hinduism or Shintoism. And it just kind of comes normally and almost like it just kind of like bubbles up into the way that we framework these original German tales. And it happens in such a natural way that to really say that the storytellers are trying to framework it deliberately to match Judeo-Christian values, in other words, to make it more relatable, seems like they would be doing a lot more than what they're actually really doing. And I think it's a lot simpler than that. And that to me is pretty wild when you consider how just natural it comes, because of the fact that we are such direct byproducts of the hero's journey, if you will, as Joseph Campbell likes to call it. And a lot of our worldviews are derivative of those kinds of stories, which is why we all relate to them and why they're also similar.
So it's kind of interesting too. I like this conversation a lot because it's like, for example, it's kind of like hip hop is rooted in Black culture, right? Mm-hmm. It's not trying to be Black culture. It is because that's the culture, the community that birthed hip hop, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it naturally, just like you were saying, Slimer, with these films and stuff, there isn't a conscious effort like from Walt Disney, we got to make this Judeo-Christian. Right. It just comes off that way because he was raised that way, right? Mm-hmm. So that influence, or like organically and subconsciously, is going to rub off on his product. Same with hip hop. Like you grew up Black community, your Black culture. That's naturally, you're not even trying, but that's naturally going to rub off into your music, right? Mm-hmm. So this stuff it's more of an organic thing, and it's not so much of we're trying to sell this message. It's more like, that's my value system, and it's going to come out, and I'm not even realizing it really. I mean, it's kind of like autopilot almost, right? Is what you're basically trying to say. Go ahead, Seymour.
And now that I'm not caught off guard,
sip of that watered down soda.
Yeah. Still to the point. Okay. Yeah. When I was young and looking at these movies, I've been, thinking about it now differently. As an adult, I can see this. But as a kid, I never thought about this, right? I simply just watched Disney because it was entertaining. And I find that fascinating now. Like sometimes even when you're watching like more adult cartoons, realizing some of the jokes they put in, you start to realize now as an adult, like, oh, okay, now I'm seeing a different perspective that I never did with Disney.
Right. Yeah.
One of the things I think that's really interesting in this discussion too, and a lot of younger viewers might not have a purview into this, right? But Pew Research, which is a group that does a lot of religious and spiritual research with the American population especially, Pew Research has come out with a study they've been doing this for many, many years, but they'll look at like how many people have an identified religion and how many people identify their religion as Christianity, Islamic, like just name your thing, right? Well, in the United States, if you go back 3 generations to like older than boomers, you go to like the greatest generation, right? That generation is almost entirely Christian and almost all religious. But as you go from generation to generation, those percentages drop significantly. Mm-hmm. So, like if you're watching this video and you come from, a family that's maybe not practicing religion as much, there's just a recognition there that's very different than it was 3 generations ago, right? Mm-hmm. So when we talk about Walt Disney and Judeo-Christian values, one of the things that people could say is they could be like, wait, what are you talking about? Like I don't like, why is that a thing? It's just that we didn't used to be as accepting, or I shouldn't say accepting, we didn't used to have as much diversity in terms of what our religious purview was back in the day. And we've been much more exposed to that as Americans. We've had much more immigrants come over bringing their own religions there. And so we're in a different kind of era than when these stories originally came out as well.
That's
well said, Jay. That's a great point. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Slimer.
I was saying that's a really good point. We both said it. That's a really good point, Jay.
That's a really good point. Yeah, no, I was gonna say too. We actually did a Lunar New Year video not too long ago, and I brought up the point how when I was a kid, right, when we were kids, Jay, and I think Slimer, you're about our age too. I like, dude, in the '90s even, I never heard of like Lunar New Year or like the red envelopes and that whole culture. And now it's become so mainstream, right? Just in the last 20, 25 years, it's changed a lot. The normie awareness is way higher than it was, back in the 90s, early 2000s. So you're right, Jay, as more immigrants come in and they introduce to us their religions and their cultures and what have you, we get a taste of much more variety than we did, like you were saying, with the greatest generation, where like literally everybody was a Christian,
Same. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. It's wild.
Especially with the internet nowadays.
That's a great point, Seymour. That's
Find the argument that hard work leads to upward social mobility no matter what. Echoes of the David and Goliath story frequently pulsate through the films, with the poor and downtrodden always eventually triumphing over the powerful and corrupt. As Pinsky summarizes, good is always rewarded. Evil is always punished. Faith is an essential element. Faith in yourself, and even more, faith in something greater than yourself, some higher power. Optimism and hard work complete the basic.
I do want to mention one
Pinsky
thing.
dubs this Disney ethos.
There are some people who don't believe in religion, but there are some people who believe in doing good, helping humanity. So with that aspect, thinking of Disney as a religion, it just could be some of the things that I see in the Disney movies. It's just being good, helping humanity.
Yes, and I was kind of touching upon that a little bit earlier too, Seymour. And you're right. A lot of this stuff is not necessarily religious, but like as human being, it's a humanity thing. Right? Like you don't have to be a religious person to want to do good by humanity. You don't have to be a religious person to want to see the good guys win and evil be punished. And, it's not exclusive to religion, so.
And I know like a lot of people who don't believe in God or Jesus, but they believe in his teachings because it's all about helping humanity.
Right. 100%. Well said.
Yeah. I think that's where the, sorry. OG.
No, you're good.
OG's like, come on. I think that's one of the reasons why he introduced the video as saying, are these 5 tenets of what we call religion, do they exist in the Disney fandom to some degree, right? So what he's trying to say is like, I think it's a really good distinction I think that Seymour is bringing up. Just because you're a Disney adult, like I would consider myself a Disney adult, to be honest. Like I would consider myself that. I'm a big fan of Disney and I'm adult. So there you go. That does not mean that I treat Disney as a religion. The question is, do some people? And so there's for sure, I think you're actually more likely, this may make people mad. I think you're more likely to treat Disney as a religion the more secular you are. Because you don't have a replacement for it.
That's true.
So the question at hand is not like, do we all treat it as a religion? To some certain extent, we probably all fit the 5 categories in some way, shape, or form. But it might not qualify it as being our religion, right? But the question is, do some people have it as their religion and act as if it is?
Yeah, it's a great point, Jay. A lot of times and we talked about this in the Disney Adult video part 1, where with the Disney Adult kind of thing, like the super fans that are like, it's everything.
Yeah.
Not with everybody. I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but a lot of times Disney is filling a void somewhere with them.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? So great point. If they don't have a religion, they don't, that this could be that thing that fills that void. Absolutely.
Seeing that in place of God working his divine magic, Disney uses magical creatures doing magic. Fairies and fairy godmothers, genies and ice queens, sea witches and land witches. In this way, scholar Kathy Murlock Jackson writes, magic becomes a way to empower the powerless, just like God does in so many classic biblical stories. So part 2 pretty much checks out. Part 3, inculcating dispositions for certain behaviors, we're going to set aside for now and return to momentarily. So we've established that Disney essentially created and maintained a consistent system of symbols about the nature of things across its films, parks, and other products. But how are those messages imparted onto its believers? Well, as author Richard Corliss speculated in a 1988 issue of Time magazine, Walt Disney's philosophy may as well have been the Jesuit credo of, give me a child before he is 7, and he will be mine for life. Indeed, Disney said as much, declaring that, I think of a child's mind as a blank book. During the first years of his life, much will be written on the pages. The quality of that writing will affect his life profoundly. By his own logic, then, Disney has been, for multiple generations, scribbling all over those blank minds, with children spending more time consuming Disney films than they do.
I don't know. I mean, it's not wrong, and it is true, but when you say it out loud, it sounds horrible. like, I don't know.
And it's happening more than ever with Disney Plus right now.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, these families got Moana on repeat. With
the question. I think the question though is like, kids by definition are going to, as soon as kids engage with the world, their brains are going to be formed by whatever. The question isn't like, is that happening? Because that's happening. Like you can't shield a child from learning about the world. The question is, in what way is it ideal for a child to learn about the world, and what should they be exposed to at what times, and what shouldn't they be exposed to at what times? So the idea that Disney or anyone, or the Jesuits for that matter, would say that is not the problem. The problem is, what is the thing that they're being indoctrinated with? That's really the problem, in my mind, at least.
Yeah,
I agree, because saying that kids have basically a tabula rasa, so they're a white slate. They have not been encultured. They haven't been indoctrinated. They're looking at the world with fresh eyes. That is not a moral judgment. What's a moral judgment? That's just an observation. I think that's a fact, and I think that observation actually goes back all the way to David Hume in the 17th century. So I mean, this isn't something that's revelatory or by any means to 21st century neuroscience. But what is a moral valuation, and what you pointed out, Jay, is what are they consuming in terms of like their moral compass? Because if they're not consuming anything, and by consume I mean just watching, listening, right? We all know that, kids get socialized to be bad people, or they can get socialized into being really good moral human beings that contribute to society. And the majority of that has to do with their surroundings. And yeah, some of it has to do with, genetics as well. I think it's pretty well known that, serial killers, for example, are genetically the way that they are, but there are epigenetic effects that happen when they're socialized as children. A lot of the childhood trauma is what activates those genes in order for them to grow up to be a serial killer. But that is the exception and not the norm. So we're talking about the norm here. But the other thing too that's really important with these movies is they make the basic assumption that morality is a posteriori and not a priori. And what that means is that you're not born with a moral compass, that you have to learn it from somewhere. And if you're not learning it from somewhere, then you're not going to ever get to those moral values on your own through any sort of like reason, by turning into your own brain and trying to reason morality. That you have to learn it. And I think it's really important that there are other institutions other than religion, because religion has always been that institution to give you, morality. But if we are going to transition into more a secular world, you're right, OG. Like you have to have a comparable, equivalent replacement of that. If we're to assume that morality is a posteriori, something that you learn through socialization and through teachings and stories, that's a big one, as opposed to trying to like get to that. What is the moral good, or what is the moral, or what is just or unjust through some kind of like internal reflection.
Well said.
Yeah, that's really good. I think it's good to put a pin in that too, because basically what you're saying is, Slimer, is how we behave nature or nurture to a degree, right? And there's probably some component of both nature and nurture in that, in how it works, but Disney is certainly trying to influence it. And I think one of the things we need to recognize too is that he has spent 7 minutes talking about how comparing Disney to this Judeo-Christian sort of religion. But I would make an argument that in 2025, Disney has never less looked like, it does not look like a Judeo-Christian valued system in its storytelling. It's far less and less every year that Disney stories come out. So that's maybe worthwhile to talk about, put a pin in that and talk about that later as well.
Oh, 100%. Well said.
Religion. And of course, as many of us grow out of childhood and into our teens and adulthood, Disney is right there to accompany us on our journeys. Except this time with Jedis and superheroes and bounty hunters, until life gets so depressing that we need the talking animals again. And then we come to part 4 of our definition: ritual and cultural performance.
That's a big one.
By far the most salient place where the rituals of Disney consolidate is, of course, at its theme parks. According to Harper's Magazine's index, an estimated 70% of Americans have been to one of them, which is probably the only thing 70% of Americans have in common. These larger-than-life locations are seen by some scholars as akin to sacred spaces, where visitors make a pilgrimage, not unlike that of Jews to Jerusalem, or Muslims to Mecca, or American Irish Catholics to the Guinness Brewery.
I love it. I love it.
Disney's parks are absent of the unholy banalities of real life, like litter, or swearing, or frowning. Religion scholar Mircea Eliade describes the importance people of faith ascribe to so-called sacred spaces, i.e. places that seem to exist in a sacred time. That is when the world was young and Edenic. In these spaces, myth and ritual help worshippers by recalibrating life toward the divine. As scholars Eric Mazur and Terracotta summarize in their book, The Happiest Place on Earth. Notably, as Drew points out, Disney too exists outside of time. Hell, Disney reportedly removed all alarm clocks from its hotels.
Pause it right there real quick.
Yeah, I got you.
So Plato, right? Plato, you guys are probably familiar with like Platonic forms. So Platonic forms are one of those like a priori things that we just know without ever being exposed to it. So like a circle, for example, right? Plato would say that, whenever you come up with the ideation of a circle, you were never exposed to a circle. It's not like there's circles and concentric circles, in nature normally. So is it how is it that we know what a circle is, right? Well, he says, like a priori, but without being exposed to it. So this is what's called the Platonic form. And so there is this, so he says, Plato says like, there's this realm where Platonic forms exist, and they're essentially the underpinnings of the existence of these forms in reality. And without this, without the Platonic forms, the things that exist in the real world couldn't exist, right? It's an ancient Greek ideation, but this is exactly what he is saying, the wisecrack guy, is happening at Disney parks. The Disney parks are the ideal versions of how we envision the world around us. And in this way, it's a lot like that Platonic form. It is that perfect circle that, like imbues life into the real things in existence. And I found that pretty fascinating. Just worth mentioning there.
Yeah, no, 100%.
One thing I'll mention really quick too, before we start it. He doesn't mention this, but I've often reflected on this myself. When we go back into archaeology and we say, oh, the Greeks worshipped these Greek gods, right? We usually find statues, we find temples, we find these kind of things. What I find really interesting is not only could you do that with the parks, which is what he talks about now, right. I actually feel like you could talk about that with the theaters as well. Because what are we doing with the theaters, right? We're going to the theater to watch the Avengers who resemble gods. And we like literally go and get our food and we get our seats and we almost worship at the foot of this giant screen which has all of these gods on it, right? So I'm not accusing anybody of worshiping the Avengers. I'm just saying when we look into ancient religions, we often attribute things to the way that they behaved, and we behave in many of the same ways. It's just that we don't think about them as religions anymore. We think about them as just things that we do for fun.
Exactly. So, well, and I mentioned this in the last Disney adult video, Jane. It's kind of interesting. Where like when Earth eventually, let's just say humanity dies off, right? And another being comes and visits Earth, and they do this, archaeology kind of like expedition. They're looking through all our ruins, right?
Yes.
And they come across like 6 or 7 statues of this Walt Disney.
Yeah.
Like it would be like they would analyze that and go, "Who is this guy?" We've now found multiple statues of this guy. Was this their god? Was this their deity? Who is this guy? Right. So it's kind of interesting when you take away, like without any knowledge of like the context of the Disney company and the studio and have you, and if you were to revisit this, thousands of years in the future with no human beings here, what would other beings think of, this stuff, the statues, the structures, maybe some of the castles will still be around. Oh, someone important must have lived here, that kind of stuff. So it's kind of interesting.
Have no references to the present, a few references towards the future, but mostly seem to exist in a past that somehow approximates Eisenhower's conservative America. That is, a time when the world was young. Indeed, Disney World was attracting the nostalgia of baby boomer parents long before it became the site of their millennial children's weddings. Missing, of course, is anything unpleasant about that.
It still kind of amazes me how, like, when you see old footage of Disneyland, like in the 50s into the 60s, like nobody dressed really casual. Like everyone had like a button-up shirt and like dress shoes on. Like you didn't really see like just t-shirts anywhere. It was kind of interesting. A totally different time period. You go there now and people are just wearing like yoga pants and sweats and they don't, no one cares. Crocs. Back then though, I mean, it was like button-up shirts and like, khaki slacks, the whole thing.
Like the Red Scare or racism or barbiturates. In Frontierland, the American frontier is mythologized as a place of courage and adventure, making the brutal genocide committed against Native people on those lands a brief footnote. American history is further glorified and sanitized in places like the Hall of the Presidents, where ugly parts.
If you want to pause it real quick, I think what he's doing there is dishonest because he's attributing malicious intent by Disney on the lack of recognition of the Native American genocide. Let's call it what it is. And I don't think that's fair, right? Because you got to remember the Frontierland was inspired by the Western movement in Hollywood in the 1940s through the 1960s. And so for him to have some kind of, and so in order for Walt Disney to have some kind of like realistic historical perspective as to what the West was, kind of defeats the purpose of what Disneyland is, which is like this, this place of escapism. And it would be completely antithetical. So for him to be dishonest about that, I feel like, the viewers beware of that kind of stuff because that was not Walt Disney's intention at all. And remember, he's going for a place of innocence. So for him simultaneously to say, Walt Disneyland or Walt Disney World and Disneyland are trying to recreate innocent eras of Disneyland while simultaneously ignoring some of the historical facts about them, I think he's contradicting himself.
Well, yeah, you have to water these things down to some degree. Like if you do a park about Hollywood, whether it's at Universal, whether it's at Disney, I mean, if you go to real Hollywood, you're gonna find some stuff there. That doesn't mean that Disney should add that stuff into their park. That's ridiculous, right? So I think it's kind of the same thing here. Like, yes, you deal with American history, but obviously it is a place of innocence, these parks and families and what have you. You can't get too realistic, so to speak. So
well, he's also to Slimer's point. He's also making the assumption that this is not what's done by every single movement that has ever existed in the history of mankind. Right. In other words, one of the things that you do when you create a movement or a fandom or a business is that you say, we value these things. Like these things are valuable to us. This is how we behave. And then you might, a lot of them actually vilify the opposite. At least Disney does not do that, although they've started doing that maybe a little bit more often recently. They don't tend to vilify the opposite. But a lot of movements will, right? In order for you to make headway, a lot of people don't like to have this crazy nuance. A lot of movements are started because there's a wellspring of emotion that pops up, and then you give reason to that emotion, you give movement to that emotion, you give a phrase or a battle cry to that emotion, and then the group of people rallies behind that emotion, right? Behind that philosophy. So to assume that this isn't done by nearly every single movement that has ever existed on the planet Earth So I think it's a little bit, to Slimer's point, it's not quite fair to Disney.
Yeah, I agree.
Or Iran-Contra are ignored as an animatronic Abe Lincoln in Christ-like glory.
I think we should include Iran-Contra, by the way, in all the presidents. Why not?
I'm shocked you even said that. Really, we're gonna add that in there. Just have Oliver North, animatronic Oliver North. That's great.
We have the JFK assassination in the Hall of Presidents. Right? What are we doing to our kids? Traumatizing.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
Historian Mike Wallace calls this commercialization of the past Mickey Mouse history, a narrative written without classes, conflict, or crime, a world of continuous consumption, a supermarket of fun.
But that's not even necessarily true. I mean, some of the stuff, like if you look at Pirates of the Caribbean, I mean, there's some pretty gnarly stuff in there. Like, I mean, they changed out the redhead scene for a reason. I don't want to say it because it's on YouTube, but we all know what they were doing, right? And they changed it. It was some pretty serious stuff. I mean, obviously, the looting, setting the town on fire. I mean, this is pretty violent, crazy behavior. So it's not like all of Disney is like this. Like, you know, there is some glimmers of this in there, like with Pirates and what have you. Now they have been kind of watering that stuff down through the years. They did change Pirates and things like that. But I mean, this whole thing about Mickey Mouse history without any conflict or crime, just ride Pirates of the Caribbean, you'll see that's not true. I mean, it's all over that attraction. It's in the song. They celebrate it in the song.
Note too, OG, that like a lot of what he's saying was present, and I don't know when that writer was writing, but it certainly wasn't in the last 10 years, because he said that without classes. But what's the one thing that Disney has done rampantly in the last 5 years? Create classes. I mean, it's literally like, do you have a lightning lane or do you not? Do you have the biggest pass or do you have the lowest pass? Do you have so that has sort of changed in Disney history.
Yeah, that's true. It has very much so, actually.
Well, and the other thing too, if you go back in the video even earlier, they talk about how conflict is a necessary story component of religion, and that Disney incorporates it into the way that they tell stories. Right? You always have the villain and the hero. Okay, so you have to have an antagonist in order to have, you know, somebody come out on top and somebody come out on the bottom. In the case of the hero's journey, as it relates to the Disney stories, you know, they take that that hero's journey approach. So, you know, the hero comes from small beginnings. They go through a process of self-discovery. They find out through that process that they're related to somebody that's very evil to them. And then it showcases how you can choose your own fate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That is a lot of conflict. That is like internal conflict, and it's also external conflict, right? And there's a lot of conflict in the way that Disney tells their stories. I would even argue that, like, Disney fans point out when Disney makes movies that don't have conflict, and they even categorize it as weak storytelling, right? Because it's Disney essentially beating around the bush. And so when you come up with it, when Disney comes out with a new movie or a new TV show and says, well, where's the conflict? What they're really saying is who's the hero and who's the villain? We don't understand what you guys are trying to tell us, because it deviates so far away from how Disney approaches storytelling. So yeah, I think that right there, saying there's no conflict, is actually that this scholar does not understand Disney if he's saying that that's something that's absent.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Eraser, cleansing history of its less savory moments. And these Disney narratives all come to life in its holy sites, where rituals like riding Splash Mountain or watching sunset parades down Main Street or getting your picture taken with the characters for a hefty fee all provide joy and catharsis. In these spaces, religious scholar Peter Gardella writes, magical beings like Tinkerbell and Mickey Mouse abound, and many shows imply that such beings might help ordinary people. Gardella calls this transtheism, or the provisional acceptance of many gods with an implied underlying oneness. As with a religious service, your sense of possibilities for your life are expanded through promises of divine intervention, or at least the ear of a sympathetic fairy godmother. Giroux describes Disney as a privatized, homogenous, and risk-free city, whereas critic Elaine Rapping points out, no trace of anything non-commodified, non-simulated, non-regulated, non-smiley-faced is visible or reachable. As with other sacred sites, the sense of effortless magic is facilitated.
Can you pause it real quick?
You don't see as by what you do.
Was that a criticism or an observation?
To me, I interpreted it as an observation, but I could be wrong. What was your what's your viewpoint on that, Jay? Was it a criticism or an observation?
Oh, I would say observation for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that how you took it, Simon, or you took it more of a critique?
So philosophers can tend to be critical. So that's why I was asking. I think it really depends on the context of that statement.
Well, you'd have to ask. The question you have to ask is that bad? Is it bad to create a space that exists in that manner? Now, to a more pointed answer, it does sound like, without reading the full context of that quote, that it's not being used inappropriately, that scholar might believe that that's bad for some reason, right? But you'd have to make an argument that it was bad. That's just because you would state those things doesn't inherently make it bad.
Right.
So here's where I would say it would be bad. It would be bad if in every circumstance you've ever existed, that was your existence, because what it would do is it would stymie personal growth.
Oh yeah.
And that's where you can get into the obsession with going to the parks. Because if all you're doing is, I'm not criticizing people that go, right? Because there's a lot of people that go that have had a lot of personal growth. But if you're a person who has not had personal growth in any meaningful way, you could be stunting that by experiencing whatever that statement was, basically the lack of any challenge, the lack of stalwarting, any resistance whatsoever. Could be detrimental to your resiliency as a human being when it comes to criticism, performance, personal growth in general, right? So like in that sense, yeah, I would say that is a negative thing. And that's a reality of being a Disney fan. And like, if you have to take that into consideration, like if you're not self-aware enough to say, hey, I might be doing too much of a good thing and it's preventing me to grow as a person in a way that's meaningful, if you have to self-check.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, Slimer, because I completely agree with you. And this is what I've been saying this for a long time. There's nothing wrong with being a Disney adult. We all identify as Disney adults, essentially. But I've been saying that you can do Disney too much, though, right? And I know that's a very subjective thing, and what is too much, right? But if all you're doing is Disney, you don't grow as a human being. Life is about having a variety of experiences, and that's what makes you grow and mature as a person. If your entire life and all your memories are wrapped up into like 900 Disney trips, I feel like you don't have the growth potential as a human being, as the person who mixes it up, travels overseas, goes and does other things. You know what I'm saying? I think as a human being, you need to have a variety of experiences. Like when I was a kid in my early 20s, I did a lot of clubbing, things like that. That stuff shapes you as a person. And if I didn't do those things and I only went to Disney, I wouldn't have those life experiences under my belt. So I do think that you do need to mix it up. And I do think, yes, to your point, Summer, you can have too much of a good thing. I like ice cream. I like it a lot. I like cheesecake, but I'm not going to have it 3 times a day unless I want diabetes, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, you can definitely overdo it, right? And I don't think these places were really designed. Like that's the thing. When Walt Disney was designing Disneyland, it wasn't with the mindset of like, oh, I hope the locals go 4 days a week. Like it was really meant as an event experience, like the thing you took, like your wife on her anniversary or your kids on their birthday or something. It wasn't meant to go multiple times a week. Now, I know we have a lot of Disney adults in our audience. I'm not trying to like judge people because I go a lot. I probably go way more than the normal person would, like once a month or so. But we can't deny though these places were not designed for that kind of visitation. They really weren't. And so we have to sort of, like you were saying, Slimer, check ourselves, have a little self-awareness and kind of realize like how much is too much and how much is not healthy. You want that variety in life. I think it's better for you. Go ahead, Seymour.
I was just going to say, you're describing my ex. And thankfully she's my ex. But yeah, we were watching We Will Rock You, and they made a little Disney joke, about how they're all about money, because I think it was about like in the story, in the musical, became Planet Mall, and they're saying it's being run by Disney, and she got offended like it was a religion. And it ever since, I'm like, that point on, I'm like, okay, that's a little too far.
Yeah.
And she needs to touch the grass.
Yes, very much so. Needs to touch grass, and real grass, not the fake grass you find at Disneyland.
I want to ask you guys a question before we lose Slimer. Actually,
Yeah.
I think.
Oh no, he's actually gonna stay with us. He's gonna be on board the whole time.
But we don't know yet. We might go so late that Slimer has to leave.
Yeah, that's true.
There's a lot of me here. But I do want to ask this question because one of the things I was thinking about as I was watching this, and I do think there's an answer here, but I want to explore this with you guys.
Sure.
There usually is a point to religions, or even spiritual perspectives, right? There's a thing to be attained. There's a thing to be pursued. There's a point to them, right?
Right.
I do think that there is a point to Disney, which I will share, but I wanted to open that up to you guys. Like, what about Disney is the point, do you think? And then that would help us define the reason why I'm asking this question, because we're on this track of saying like what could be too much. Well, the question would then be is, what am I trying to achieve? What state am I trying to achieve? And at what point in time does it become too much that I'm trying to invest in that thing too much?
That's a great question, Jay. Go ahead, Slimer.
That's a good question. And just so everybody understands in the audience what Jay is saying is so the point of becoming a Christian is to, for example, accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior so that way you don't go to hell. Okay. The point of the point of Hinduism is to escape the wheel of reincarnation, right? You learned your lesson, you escape samsara, you join Brahma. Okay. And if I get that wrong, I apologize, but I haven't taken a religious class in quite a long time. But that's essentially what he's saying. Like the religion, the practice itself is a means to an end and not an end in itself.
Right.
So for Disney, if we were to assume that it has all the characteristics of a religion, it has to have that. It has to have that means to an end, because if it doesn't have it, then what is it? So for me, Jay, to answer your question, I think that it does have that. It doesn't have that component. So it doesn't have that that spiritual awakening that leads to everlasting life or escaping samsara or whatever it is. I think it's purely hedonism.
Interesting.
But you do get to chill with Walt and the 9 old men when you die and go to heaven, though. That's a pretty cool. Yeah, but no, I would agree. There is, in all seriousness, there is no means to an end here. It's more of like, to kind of quote the meme, the friends you made along the way, it's kind of like that whole mindset, right? Where it's kind of like, I think Disney adults are kind of looking to just like everyone else. They're looking to be happy. They're looking for happiness. They're looking for a good life. And I think they find that through Disney. And they feel it improves their quality of life. There's no end game necessarily. I'm on brand here. No, there's no end game here. There's no end game with it necessarily. Where like with Christianity, when you die, you go to heaven. You get with Disney, it's not like that. It's more or less just, hey, I really really enjoy this thing. It gives me happiness, and I want to fill my days with this thing. So I think that's pretty much as far as it goes.
Yeah, like the temporality of it is the immediate joy you receive when you're there, but there is no point to try to get joy in the afterlife, whatever kind of afterlife you believe in, whether you believe in a monotheistic God or whether you believe that the universe is God, right? Which is completely the opposite. Yeah, there is no obtaining for future temporalities. It's right here, right now.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
Seymour, did you have a take on that at all?
I love how he
I was just thinking, is Disney a religion? Or some people I see even on X or people I speak to, they even think Disney as a cult. And some people describe cult like the new religious movement. So I was just thinking in my mind is how if Disney is, instead of a religion, more of a cult, and they worship Walt Disney in a way like a cult does.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. It does feel. Yeah, it does. Actually,
And
part
then-
one kind of touched upon the cult stuff. Go ahead, Seymour.
And then I was just thinking of like other companies like Apple,
Mm.
Tesla, Nintendo. Are they like religions or are they like cult? Like because if you look at Tesla right now, right, they worship Elon Musk.
Yeah, that's true. That is very, very true.
So just to follow up on with my answer to this question too, is I totally agree with both of you. OG, I think Slimer, you put the word hedonism on it, which I think is actually a really good word to put on it, which I hadn't thought of. I thought of the word happiness as well. Like you are going there for the pursuit of temporary happiness, right? Like
Right.
it is, you only are happy while you're there. You're only happy while you're thinking about it, maybe like esoterically or whatever, when you have the time to, I should say. So I do think that there's something there. Now, the question would be, is that enough to make it a religious experience? And that's where I think the best definition that we might find, and we're going to have to watch this whole thing to kind of get there, the best definition that we might find is that it is mimicking a religion for the sake of getting you to spend money. But it cannot be in and of itself your end game, to use your word, OG, because it doesn't really have the components that would allow an end game to flourish. And it's only offering that end game to the extremely wealthy and extremely privileged. Because when we're talking about Disney as a religion, yeah, for us that live in the United States, most of us, 70% of us, have a chance to visit the parks, according to what the stat that he used. But if you start to take Disney and you start to say, okay, well, how many people around the world have the financial resources to go to the parks and go to them often? I mean, you're talking about a fraction of percent of the human population that's actually able to achieve this.
Right.
So it just starts to become a very awkward conversation. And I think the thing that the reason I brought up the question was you guys were talking about how much is too much. And I feel like that if Disney can be a portion of what makes you happy. But if it's the only thing that makes you happy, suddenly that sounds very problematic to me personally.
Yes, very much so, Jay. I agree with you. I've been saying it. I've been saying that for a really, really long time. There's nothing wrong with being a Disney adult. There's nothing wrong with loving Disney like crazy. But when it's the only thing that will scratch that itch, that gets a little toxic. You know what I'm saying? You should have other interests in life, other things that bring you happiness, other, vacation spots you want to go to. If it's only Disney, I think that's where you get into some unhealthy territory. Absolutely.
You got to go to Universal every now and then too,
Bro, I was there yesterday. I did a solo trip yesterday at Universal. I had a blast, bro.
You did it too? You did it too, you did it back to back.
I did Universal Saturday and Sunday. Saturday I went with the Italiano, and on Sunday I did a solo trip. And yeah, dude, I had a really good time. Yeah,
I want to say something, and then yeah, let's move on to the video. But if you're chasing the divine by continuously going to the Disney parks, because this is what people that continuously do right? They're chasing the divinity that they feel whenever they're there. That sanguine, pure essence of happiness and joy, and the absence of any feeling and emotion or memory that causes them pain. Chasing that divinity is no different than when somebody shoots heroin, not because of what it gives them, right? Because if you ask a heroin or a fentanyl addict, like, why do you do it? They always say, it's not what it gives me, it's the pain that it takes away, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so by always constantly chasing the divine, parentheses, I'm not saying it's really divine, but it is the practice of it, you're essentially exhibiting the same exact behaviors as somebody that's an addict. I mean, it's an addiction, right? So, and you'd be hard to press me on that it is not, right? Yeah, that's the last thing I wanted to say on that. I know that was kind of like a little bit of a dark theme, but I think it's worth mentioning because it really hints to Jay's question, which is like, what is it that you're trying to achieve and obtain? Because if it's not everlasting life, escaping samsara, whatever religion you want to compare it to, then you have to be able to describe what it is that we're actually doing. Otherwise, like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I know it's great. It's a great point. And it is very much like addiction, right? Like drinking alcohol in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's great to have a little, beer or some soju with some friends, have a good time and laugh, right? That's great. But if you're pounding, 12 beers before bed alone, that's probably a problem. You know what I'm saying? So like these kind of things are like the issue, or like if you're doing like hard drugs and it's like a thing to cope or whatever, that's where it becomes unhealthy. It's not so much that like Disney is a bad thing, but when you do it in excess and you do it for, like you were saying, Summer, like a coping mechanism to like put a Band-Aid on some life problems, that's the issue. That's a huge issue. And I think a lot of Disney adults, I think a lot of them deal with that issue. Not all of them, but a lot of them.
Go ahead, Seymour.
I was just going to ask, if we believe that Disney is a religion, do you believe there's multiple different religions within the Disney community?
Oh, 100%. It has its own denominations for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well said, Seymour. Yeah, you're right on that
because
one.
I've seen some who want the original classic Walt Disney,
Mm-hmm.
and then I see people preaching that, and then I see other people talking about we like change. Change is good. Change is good for us. We evolve as as a community with change.
Yeah, that's true. The Disney as a company is so hermeneutical, it's unbelievable. The fact that we can all take different subjective interpretations of what it, and I've said this in the last video, like how do you do your Disney? What does it mean to be Disney? And because it has a cult or personality figurehead, Walt Disney, we now even try to interpret what he means when he was saying specific things, like we're trying, like we interpret the Bible. So it's absolutely crazy. I'm glad you brought that up, Seymour, because I eventually wanted to bring it up, but yeah, I'm glad you brought it up though.
Fantastic point. We try to, what did Walt mean when he said he doesn't want alcohol in the park? Did he mean forever, or does he mean at that moment in time it's not appropriate? We kind of analyze what he wanted or what he would do or what he wouldn't do. Fantastic points there.
The vibe of the Vatican, after all. Similarly, there's a virtual absence of anything non-magical at Disney, most especially visible labor. Disney employees, cast members, use underground tunnels to transport food, products, and waste. As Sherer concludes, through the use of public visual space, i.e. parks like Magic Kingdom, Disney's network of power relations promotes the construction of an all-encompassing world of enchantment, allegedly free from ideology, politics, and power. That's in spite of the fact that political lobbying is the reason the Disney World was able to exist for so long as a self-governing independent special district. The park paints itself as a place of transcendence.
Can you pause that for a second?
Yeah.
When it comes to the cast members, I actually feel like I'm not sure what argument he's trying to make there. He may bring it up later, but some of the cast members are some of the biggest Disney adult fans that you'll ever meet, right? Like, and I say that in a loving way. I'm not saying that they're doing anything wrong. I'm just saying, like, a lot of my friends that love Disney, like, wanted to actively work there, and were part of this cast member staff that went through the process of providing a guest experience. So, I mean, I guess you could go to a farther like comparison and say that those are like martyrs or disciples, so they martyr their own freedom and of joy and happiness so that we can receive joy and happiness. You could go there with it, but it just feels like we're stretching the metaphor out so far at that point that it begins to break down under its own weight.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jay.
Life, which brings us to stipulation 5.
Super. I want to pause it real quick, and I want to point out why that's a problem. Because let's say we're trying to say, okay, so in this instance, we're trying to see if Disney matches up with the definitions according to anthropology. A specific anthropologist who wrote a seminal book in 1973 says, hey, look, if you're doing anthropological work, here's some key characteristics of religion that you can look for to determine if it's a religious belief system or not. Okay. So let's say, incidentally, there's something else that meets all of those characteristics, and then you find something else that meets all those characteristics, then at that point, everything's a religion. And if everything matches those characteristics identically, then the definitions become nonsensical. Let me give you another example. If physics only observes the things that are physical in the world, and then they start to extend, and this actually is something that's really, I would say this is something that is controversial in physics right now, because if we're now saying the things that we're observing are non-physical, then physics itself becomes a nonsensical practice, because now anything that is physical and non-physical, to include, let's say, the spiritual, and this is a problem saying like science proves God. Well, God is a spiritual being, and therefore he's not physical. So if he is spiritual and physics can prove it, then what is the physical? What is physics then? Like, because if you're gonna extend the definition to everything that it can observe, whether it's physical or non-physical, then physics doesn't make any sense. And that's like analogical to what I'm trying to say here, is like, if everything that you observe fits the definition of religion, everything's a religion, then the entire process of trying to assess is ridiculous and needs to be reworked.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so it's kind of like The Incredibles. When everyone's super, nobody is, essentially.
I shouldn't have said that. So
Held by the group are taken as real. Now, we're obviously not saying that Disney adults literally wish upon stars or work hard at their jobs just because 7 dwarves of various dispositions told them to. But Disney's grand narrative of spiritual uplift, moral truth, and endless nostalgia seems to be taken at face value, or filtered through the fervor with which Disney adults express themselves. Disney adults may not pay tzedakah at the Temple of Tinkerbell, but one popular Disney World vacation tip site suggests that 2 adults have to cough up between $1,900 and $2,800 to visit Disney, which I'd call a healthy tithe. Meanwhile, according to the Washington Post, Disney continues to hike prices as much as 5 to 10% each year, which is fine because wages go up at the same rate, right? That's how economics work. Viewing Disney World as a site for rites of passage, like weddings or bar and bat mitzvahs, cements the sense of faith fans have in the sanctity of its ethos. Now, let's return to stipulation number 3, inculcating dispositions for behavior. What, if any sort of behavior, does the Disney empire encourage in its supplicants? You might be surprised, actually, that we haven't really brought it up yet. It starts with C, synonym for eat. That's right, consumption, and lots of it. As American studies scholar Eric Smoodin puts it, Disney constructs childhood so as to make it entirely compatible with consumerism. And it does so in the hopes of creating lifelong patrons of Disney entertainment and related products. Though it's not the only company to attempt such a feat, Mazur and Coda argue that because of its market penetration, its integrated marketing, and its access to many levels of culture through its corporate network, Disney is uniquely suited for the religification of its commodity. Now, this is important because, as Jerome notes, in our world of rapidly evolving mass communication, pop culture is a central way for young people to learn about themselves, their relationship to others, and the larger world. He argues that Disney is perfectly suited for a world where democracy has come to be less defined by civic engagement than by the freedom to consume freely and be entertained. Disney, he explains, primed children to relate to themselves as consumers before citizens, as individuals pursuing self-interest rather than members of communities pursuing any sort of collective good, and then carry that self-perception into adulthood. Nowhere is this more evident than at Disney World, where, as Giroux explains, consumption becomes the unifying force through which families organize themselves. Disney theme parks not only provide middle-class families with an upbeat version of the American past, they give such entertainment the force of civic duty. Encouraging spectatorship and passivity, Disney appropriates nostalgia simply to maximize consumption in the interest of fun and commerce. All at the side of Mickey Mouse popsicles, of course. Now, given Disney's ability to fulfill all 5 stipulations of Gertz's definition of religion, it's easy to conclude that it is in fact functioning like a religion, even if unintentional. But there's still a bit more to unpack. See, most religions ask us to sacrifice things in exchange for, say, salvation or God's good grace.
Sacrifice your money.
To give our money to houses of worship or charities, or spend part of our weekends in prayer, or deny ourselves the pleasure of red meat, or avoid masturbating so the Pope doesn't show up to our house and glue our palms to a cross. Religions also typically ask us to strive to abide by an ethical code and repent when we fail to do so. But Disney's pitch is a bit more simple. As Phil Vischer, co-founder of VeggieTales, persuasively argues, Disney has wrapped up and sold America what people wanted to hear, which was, give us the upside of religion without the obligation of religion.
Yeah,
that is, like
a great
a
way
lot
of
of
putting it.
businesses, Disney offers us enlightenment through consumption without asking us to do any of the pesky self-examination that traditional religion might require. The difference...
Although I will argue, and that's why I love what we do here on OD55, because we do ask our audience to do a little bit of self-reflection quite a bit. Even in this video, we've been pretty critical of going too much, you know what I'm saying, and things like that. And I think that kind of self-reflection is very healthy. A lot of fans don't want to hear that kind of stuff. They do not want to hear that. Oh, I'm going too much. Who are you to tell me? But it's very good and very healthy to sort of self-examine. And that includes myself. I'm not, you know, I mean, for everybody, it's good to self-reflect. Am I doing this too much? Is this becoming an issue? I think it's very healthy, but yeah, a lot of fans would not agree.
They just happen to have a lot more power and, of course, a lot more real estate than most of the other people trying to sell you. At their parks, we can enjoy all the spiritual and ecstatic feeling of religious worship without having any of the moral or ethical responsibility that religion imposes upon us. Disney's ideology is ultimately pretty hollow, and yet its cultural reach is so expansive. Its appeals to childhood innocence so persuasive that we can easily forget. It's not a value-driven benevolent entity striving to uplift its followers. It's a profit-driven multinational corporation. As Giroux puts it, innocence serves as a rhetorical device that cleanses the Disney image of the messiness of commerce, ideology, and power. That is to say,
I do want to
marketing
mention
itself
something
as an institution in the
that I do see that people do forget, at least with the Disney adults, that Disney is a corporation that's a business, you know, here to make
Right.
money. And I see a lot of the times that they get upset if they try to move anything in regards to money, even though they are a business.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely, Seymour. We talk about this a lot together on the channel and stuff, where it's like, and that's where the religious thing kind of comes into it. It's almost like you're desecrating the church. How could you remove the rivers of America? You know, that's holy land, you know, basically, right? Or whatever.
Sacrilegious,
Yeah, sacrilegious, you know, or whatever. So it's, yeah, there's a lot of that there, and it is a business. And, you know, look, obviously, you know, there's balance to that. You don't want to like just go all in on the business and lose your heart and your charm too. But fans need to understand that this is not a charity. This is not, you know, something where they're doing this just for the for the good old sake of it. I mean, they are trying to make money here, you know. So it's a great point, Seymour.
Which
to make
is
another
why-
point. Oh, sorry. You continue your point, Seymour.
Oh, I was just gonna say this is why I brought up my ex last time, because she didn't want to face reality that Disney was a business. She wanted just to go in her own space and believe that Disney is Disney without any of the noise in the background.
Yeah. And that comes to the whole Disney adult thing where they're like, la, 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 la. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it, but you have to hear it because it's part of the equation. It's part of the reality. Go ahead, Jay. I'm sorry, brother.
No, you're good. Slightly change of subject, but as we've been talking about this, one of the things that's becoming apparent to me about this video is it is making a very intellectual, philosophical argument of what religions actually are. And it is sort of indicating that religions only exist to make us feel better about our lives. And there's not really anything more to it than that. And the reason why I say that is because when we're comparing Disney to a religion, it was just kind of interesting to me that people have like deeply religious experiences oftentimes because they feel like, so it's one thing to say that Disney should be like shalom. And I'm going to define the term shalom as everything as it should be. And the Disney parks actually try to reflect that. And that's probably the best thing that the Disney World parks try to reflect. Everything is as it should be. There's not trash everywhere. People are nice. You know, it's kind of one of the better ways of describing what a Disney park is trying to do. But to assume that all religion is just, to use our friend Alia's term, an emotional support animal, is, I feel like, limiting spirituality and religion to one context, which seems fairly surface level in terms of us comparing Disney to it.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. That's a very fair point. And big shout out to Alia. We love Alia.
Oh yeah, Alia's the
Make you
best.
forget the immense and ever-growing chokehold over the entertainment industry. And it's obviously not just preaching the gospel of Mickey for fun. As Giroux furthers, That Disney has a political stake in creating a particular moral order favorable to its commercial interests raises questions about what it teaches. He argues that the lesson plans at the School of Disney ultimately reinforce an infantilized and privatized notion of citizenship. Disney probably isn't consciously trying to mimic religion, but its approach to converting acolytes can border on indistinguishable. Let us repeat. Disney is not trying to be a religion, but its tactics and the reception it receives from fans often takes on a spiritual tinge.
And I think that's an important distinction here. I think he's right on that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so much Disney, I think, that treats itself like a religion. It's the fans that treat Disney like a religion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's a very, very important observation there, because he's absolutely correct on that.
Yeah, what he's saying is so his conclusion is the inverse of what the opening statement was at the very beginning of the video, where we're trying to analyze if Disney's a religion. So, well, incidentally, but what's making it a religion is not just their business practices, and probably less so that, but the interaction between the consumer and the company. That combination, or like you have, it takes two to tango. You know what I mean? And if the consumers aren't interacting with it in this specific way, exhibiting specific behaviors, which can be observed as religious behaviors, then without that, there is no Disney might be a religion, because it's something that we're impressing on it with our interaction with it, as opposed to something that is exclusively being impressed onto us directly towards us. Like it goes both ways, in other words.
1,000%. And you know what's crazy about this whole situation? This whole thing is about Disney as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
You can do the same breakdown. And if Wisecrack, if you're watching this, please do this. You could literally do this same question and apply it just to Star Wars alone.
Yeah.
Because Star Wars has a lot of the elements, and maybe even a lot more religious overtones and stuff like that in its franchise, and the way the fans sort of like idealize George Lucas, the same way they do Walt Disney.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's a lot there you can dive into. But what's wild to me is, like, as Disney, we can analyze this stuff, and it's very, it comes off very religious, right, with the fandom and what have you. But even like the subsidiary is like a religious experience. I mean, that's how crazy the overall Disney brand is, where even the subsidiary, Lucasfilm, is a religion basically in and of itself. It's wild.
And something that's, I was just thinking about this, something that is replete in human history is how cult of personalities have somehow always developed a religion around specific individuals. Like you have Mahatma Gandhi, you have Jesus, Buddha, Martin Luther King. I mean, there's so many different figures that have existed throughout history who said something that resonated with a lot of people, and then before you know it, there is a cult-like following. I mean, Charles Manson's another example. There's a cult-like following that can be described as nothing but a religion. And it seems to me that Walt Disney has impacted the world so impactfully in so many different ways, for different people around the world, that the same thing is happening with Walt Disney's cult of personality, where we're turning it into, a religious practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was a man who was born in 1901. We're in the year 2025. We're sitting here talking about himself. I mean, that's crazy to me, you know?
Case in point.
Disney's interests are well served when people buy its products, but its interests are best served when a consumption-driven population is more concerned with having fun at Disney World than, say, with the labor rights of the workers making the park happen in the first place, or the company's serial cover-ups of sexual harassment and assault. In our cynical day and age, we all pretty much know that giant corporations basically never become giant corporations because they've done things in kind and magnanimous ways, no matter how cute their mascot is. And Disney is no different. While it's been hosting gay days since 1991 under the auspice of celebrating the queer community, it was also just recently busted for donating money to politicians who oppose queer rights. That includes Florida Republican Dennis Baxley, a career-long champion of anti-gay legislation and sponsor of the controversial Don't Say Gay bill, which limits school teachers from mentioning anything queer-related in the classroom. While claiming to be a pride-friendly company, they've simultaneously been funding politicians who are actively harming the queer community. Now, after public outcry, Disney CEO Bob Chapek eventually spoke out against the bill, promising to be a better ally, and announced that the company was pausing political donations in Florida. Yet, concurrently, queer Pixar workers published a statement.
Hold on, I think I have a audio for that.
Apologize for not being the ally that you needed me to be.
There he is. There he is.
This is an interesting. I'm confused about the structure of this video, because in the beginning, this is where I wanted to talk about the changing nature of Disney.
Yeah,
because they started the video out by claiming that Disney was attempting to use Judeo-Christian values as a means by which to indoctrinate kids and then get them to, you know, become part of the Disney religion, is what it seemed like, would seem like the direction that he was going in.
right.
And then now he stops and pauses and says, oh, but since 1991, that ideology has changed drastically, and that's no longer the ideology, or maybe it is underneath the surface, because there's still, it feels to me, this Seymour made this point earlier, and this is the point I would make about this whole video probably, but it seems to me like Disney is using whatever means necessary to extract value in the form of monetary payment
Right.
and attention and engagement into itself to perpetuate its business, right? Which he's talking about right now to a certain extent. So it's weird that we would start the video by saying Disney had this like Judeo-Christian value kind of nomenclature about it and means by which to indoctrinate your kids, and then we fast forward through the years and we go, actually Disney's being actually more inclusive, and it's reaching outside of what you'd probably call a traditional Judeo-Christian value. I'm not suggesting that you can't be Christian or Jewish and not be in support of LGBTQ+. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that's not the tradition that Walt came out of, right? So why would you expand your reach into other areas unless you were actually in my opinion, just trying to make money?
Yeah, and I think that's what it really boils down to. I think it's a money-making thing. I think even with Walt, he was trying to get as many people to buy his product as possible, you know? And we've said that many times. I've said that many times here on the channel, where it's like a lot of conservatives were upset that Bob Iger and Disney were trying to brainwash kids into, being queer or whatever, what that was. But it really isn't the case. They jumped on the trend, the woke trend, when they felt it was making them money, and they're just as quickly jumping off of it now when they feel like it's no longer going to make them money. So at the end of the day, Jay, to completely agree with you, it's all about the money at the end of the day. It's not really so much about the ideology. It's more about, hey, what do people want to see, and how much, and how much can we get from them if we go this way or go that way, right? So go ahead, Seymour.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I agree. Especially now that Disney is now growing and expanding in different horizons, such as sports and Hulu and general entertainment. Disney's not the same Disney that we once knew,
Right?
And for that reason, it's because they're part of the Green Party, cash.
Exactly. And that's why Disney has lasted 100+ years, because they do evolve. You have to evolve. But go ahead, Seymour. Sorry, brother.
I was just gonna say exactly. He evolved even to the point where we now have sports betting with ESPN, and we had Deadpool in the Disney parks, but yet there is still the original Disney adults getting upset with that, as if it's a religion.
And this is where it starts getting into the different denominations of people that either highly criticize or worship the Disney Corporation, because if, let's say, you're more of a storytelling traditionalist, you prefer the Joseph Campbell storytelling mechanism, so the hero's journey, if you will, then that's going to be your preference for Star Wars. If, on the other hand, you prefer the deconstructionist style of storytelling, then, the statement, good guys, bad guys, it's all the same in The Last Jedi, is going to resonate with you more, because it is a more accurate historical account of what really happens between two nation states that are at war with each other, where you have this military industrial complex is highly invested in, changing the geopolitical sphere of the region for, resource, acquisition, blah, 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 blah. We all know the story. It happens on TV every single day, right? And depending on what generation you're in and how you have consumed your history, you're going to have a preference of one versus the other. My mom is Star Wars. The original Star Wars movies are going to resonate with my mom more than the new Star Wars, like Andor, for example, where it really gets into like the nitty gritty of like espionage and betrayal and the things that it really take. Like, for example, what CIA operatives are essentially doing every day to prop up, if you're against American, against American policies, you're probably going to say prop up the American regime. But if you're American and you believe what the CIA is doing, for example, and other clandestine agencies in the United States, you're going to see us to prop up American interests, right? So it really depends on your perspective and how you've been either affected positively or negatively by the actions of the U.S. government. But that in and of itself, and the fact that we have more exposure to this now with the internet, where you had to rely on people like Henry Kissinger to explain to you like the actual details and intricacies of geopolitical, geopolitics. Disney is going to make movies for those people, and it's not going to be for you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Jay.
Totally true. I was just gonna say that I do think some of the changing nature of Disney I do think that Walt had a perspective on the world. I do think that it was Judeo-Christian, though I don't necessarily think that Walt was trying to. I actually think it was more Americana than it was Judeo-Christian, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, Americana is heavily influenced by Judeo-Christian ideology and behavior, right? I do not think. I think that every generation that has passed with Disney has further removed itself from the Walt's idea of what the world should be. I think that Eisner was a little bit more in alignment with what Walt was trying to do, but I don't think that Iger is even fairly close to it, to be honest with you. I think Iger is actually trying to reflect more of the American values of our time than he is trying to reflect the American values of the fake 1950s or whatever Disney was doing, right? It's a very different way of behaving, and so I don't. So when we start talking about these things, this is where it starts to feel like it gets way further away from being a religion, and it actually just reverses. I think this is what you guys were kind of saying, and I'll just say it a different way. It flips the question on its head. The question is no longer, is Disney trying to be a religion? Disney is trying to sell happiness or hedonism, to use Slimer's word. In that effort, it is behaving sometimes like a religion, but if we are embracing it as a spiritual perspective and adopting it as a religion, that's on us, not on them.
Right. Well, 100%. 100%, Jay.
I like that, Jay.
Claiming that Disney higher-ups insisted they cut nearly every moment of overtly gay affection in their films, suggesting the company's allyship remains suspect. And this is hardly the first of Disney's questionable political affiliations. They've also funded business groups who actively fight climate change legislation. And a recent report found that 69% of their political donations went to anti-abortion politicians. It's rainbow capitalism at its most insidious. Or take the time in 2013 as Disney was developing the movie Coco when they tried to trademark the phrase Dia de los Muertos. This was part of Disney's gargantuan merchandising machine, which dates back to 1937 Snow White. You heard that right. In the lead up to the release of their groundbreaking celebration of Mexican culture, Disney tried to actively snatch the name of a sacred tradition out of the hands of the Mexican people across multiple media platforms. It's not good, team. It's not good. What's more, the values espoused in Disney films over the years can leave a foul taste in the mouth of a more progressive culture.
Can you pause it for
Yeah.
a second? One of the things is I find a little bit interesting about this portion of the video is the creators are almost assuming that the value system that they seem to be espousing is superior to other value systems. Now,
Right.
they could be trying to point out that Disney is two-faced in its behavior, which I think you're kind of trying to point out. But already in mentioning anti-abortion, people funding people who are anti-abortion, anti-LGBTQ, it almost as if the writer of this script was like, clearly these things are good, and by Disney not adhering to them, Disney is bad.
Right.
Which is not objective journalism. It's very biased, and I'm not saying I agree with either one. I'm not saying what my opinion is on the matter.
Right.
I'm just saying it is almost accusing Disney of using propaganda to create its own religion to be able to sell to people. But the video itself feels like somewhat propaganda-like in its messaging, to be honest.
Yeah, it does. You're absolutely right, because they're packaging it like this is the objective moral standing.
Exactly.
Right? And for some people, it's not, right? So yeah, no, 100%, Jay. It's a great observation.
And the other thing too is Disney is a international. I mean, it's a multinational conglomerate.
Yes.
And so it has to make business decisions more prudently than just, hey, we're going to go all in on progressive liberal ideals. And the thing is if you're trying to do it from a business sense, yes, you can go out there and say, hey, we stand for, gay rights, and we stand for, we're pro-choice. But on a global scale, you are actually a small percentage of the people that have those beliefs. And if you're trying to run a multinational conglomeracy, that's probably not going to work in your favor, and the board's going to fire you. And that's just the reality of it. And that's why they placate towards both sides of the aisle. Now, one thing that I think he needs to mention, just to add some honesty to his observations, is that Disney is the rule and not the exception in this corporate behavior. All of them do it because all of them, you have to play the game. If you want a zoning thing passed so you can build your new land, you got to play in the dirt with the politicians. That's just reality. That's not how we want it, but that's the way the world is.
It is. You're right. I mean, Universal was silent on the Don't Say Gay bill, but then they sell all the Pride merch, and we're the biggest ally. Pride is universal. I think the merch is and all that stuff. So they play both sides. Disney plays both sides. You're absolutely correct, Slimer, that it's the rule, not the exception. Now, real quick, before we start the video again, I just want to say this line right here, tired of the tropes, right? Where the princess is being rescued by princes. This is totally kind of a digression here, but I've had issues with this before where people complain about that. But it's but now we have the other side of the trope, where now the trope is that they don't need a prince. So now you're essentially creating a trope again on the other side of the coin. And that annoys me. Let's just do good storytelling. And sometimes the story warrants the princess wanting to find love, and sometimes it doesn't. But anytime you do all in on one or the other, it kind of gets annoying to me. And it's very tropey, so
and
I just want to kind of rant a little bit.
100%. This is an example of Walt Disney having one foot in postmodernism, and then another one having it in modernity and romanticism, which is the earlier era of Disney.
And it might be helpful. I'm not going to be the fact checker here. However, it might be helpful in regards to this funding of politicians narrative, which I think Slimer nailed it. Disney's trying to get things done. Government impedes things getting done, so you fund some of the government officials so that you can get things done.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, though Disney has supported both sides of the aisle in their political campaigns, I believe in the 2010s, it was actually supporting the DNC candidates far more than it was supporting the DOP candidates, monetarily speaking. And I'm pretty sure that's objectively true. I don't have the data. I don't have the numbers, but somebody fact check that, because I'm almost positive there was more money going to progressive candidates than conservative candidates.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure you're on that, Jay. And the other thing too is while Disney is not perfect in terms of their support for the LGBTQ community and all that stuff, we've seen it with behind the scenes kind of stuff, they do still do a lot of good stuff for that community. I mean, Disney Land Resort employs a ton of people in that community, and they're celebrated. Howard Ashman, I mean, in the early late 80s, early 90s gay man with AIDS. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that was a huge stigmatism back then, and they embraced him, and he's a Disney legend. So yes, they have their faults. They are a huge, massive company, but by and large, I think they do a lot more for these communities than a lot of other big corporations do, in my opinion. You know what I'm saying? Go ahead, Seymour. I do apologize.
No, I was just gonna say that I agree with Slimer. As we mentioned in the DEI video, how like Disney is now moving more apolitical, or at least in the middle, and not leaning one side to another, because that's good for business. You got to think of it like Slimer said, worldwide, and that's just one little area in America.
Right. Exactly.
Tired tropes of princesses being rescued by princes, Disney has long been a protector of white heteronormative ideology, with much of the fantasy that makes it so appealing coming.
And see, this is exactly what Jay's talking about. This guy is inserting his opinion into this like big time right now.
Yeah, he's applying a lot of critical race theory.
Yeah.
From a longing for an imagined past of greater simplicity. Despite Disney's attempts to keep its nostalgia apolitical, there's nonetheless a deeply political tinge to its evocation of a better time. Especially when you remember that in this romanticized past, many minority groups experienced profound discrimination. And while Disney is certainly getting better about depicting more diverse stories, it's hard to outrun its legacy, especially when those foundational films and park attractions remain so popular. So it looks like Disney has successfully used aspects of religion to maintain its cultural power, but that doesn't mean that it's intentionally built a religion.
Okay, let me
at the same time.
See, I agree with you, Jay. What did that whole thing about the diversity and the gay stuff, what did any of that have to do with coming back around to, is it a religion? It feels like that whole section had nothing to do with the overall video. Am I tripping or?
No, that's how it feels to me too.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. I was kind of hoping he would kind of tie that all together and make it make sense, but he doesn't seem like he's going to do that.
he went off on a tangent to let you know what his political opinions were, and then he got back on track on the topic.
100%.
Yeah.
Time, it's the epitome of a capitalist institution and has always been most loyal to the creed of maximizing profits. So what exactly does that make it? That question, like the historic relationship between capitalism and religion in America, is more complicated than you might think. Dating back to the 16th century Christian missionaries who accompanied gold-hungry explorers on their excursions to the New World. Religious scholar Robert Lawrence Moore argues that religion has evolved alongside mass consumer culture.
I thought that was D23 for a second.
Increasingly commodifying along the way. He writes that religious influences established themselves in the forms of commercial culture that emerged in the 19th century, turning the United States into a flowering Eden of leisure industries by the middle of the 20th. Beginning with various sects mass-producing extensive religious reading materials, religions expanded their wares by entering radio and theater, and eventually television via televangelists like Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, Pat Robertson, and Jimmy Swaggart. They expanded beyond halls of worship into nonprofits, athletic clubs like the YMCA, social halls, and so on. He explains that, by degrees, religion itself took on the shape of a commodity, as it looked for ways to appeal to all consumers, using the techniques of advertising and publicity. At the same time, religious institutions have been notably exempt from some of the governmental regulations and limitations of other markets. Moore notes, Riley, that flashy neon signs promising Jesus saves would never get churches in trouble for false advertising. After World War II, commodified religion poured into American culture at an unprecedented rate, and culture responded in like, with a proliferation of Hollywood blockbusters based on biblical stories. Around this time, America saw the beginnings of the megachurch, which according to scholar Scott Thuma, functioned like corporations, with the pastor as the often handsome and handsomely compensated CEO. They brand themselves like corporations too, by offering disparate, attractive forms of fun, performing arts, recreation activities, gyms, even movie theaters. And don't even get us started again on the enormous Christian music scene.
Can you pause right there? So this is a really interesting observation, and I do agree with it. And the reason I agree with it is because the mechanism of commerce that we use in the world right now, which you could argue is, global free trade and capitalism, because we live in that economic system, there is no escaping it. Everything is a byproduct of it, because in order for you to be successful, With your commodities, you have to play the game, if you will. Even though it's not a game, it's a figure of speech. So everything has to reshape itself and mold to this, to this, this mechanism through which we do modern day trade, because we're not, I said in the last video, we're not mercantilism anymore, we're capitalism, right? So the fact that nothing has been able to escape this way of doing trade and business, what this essentially does is it essentially relinquishes Disney and even religion in that sense from branding themselves as a commodity, because if you don't, then you're not playing to win, you're playing to lose. And if you're playing to lose, then what are you doing? But it's a really strong statement, not so much about, more so about Disney and religion, I think, but about how the mechanism with which we do trade, you can't escape it. It's like a gravity well and a black hole.
Yeah. If you were, I agree with Slimer. I think this is a phenomenal critique of modern religion. By the way, he's criticizing specifically Christianity. It says, and it wasn't just Christianity, so he might criticize some other form of religion.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But as a Christ follower, let me just make a couple of comments, particularly about this. I think it's really interesting to take off your religion hat and to put on your observer hat and to sit back and say, how is Disney like? Because what he just pointed out is that modern day Christianity has become so consumerist in its behavior. In other words, if we go back in time and get in a time machine and go back to the early church, which is basically Jesus Christ dies on the cross and then the early church is formed, right? So that's there's a period of time where we call that the early church. The early church is meeting in homes. They're not going to big giant buildings, right? Mm-hmm. That is all developed out of various Catholic types of traditions. It's not actually a tradition of the early church. They would go meet in homes with one another, right? This was a very oppressed group of people, first under Roman law and then later under other laws as well. And so as they're operating, they're not the go-to thing. You're very much looked down upon if you're going to one of these churches, because you're one of the weirdos, right? Like it's a completely different. Now in America, we then say, oh, this actually has its own form of cool factor. There was a church that I used to tangentially work with, meaning I was very familiar with them, and they had a skate park on their campus, right? They later said that the skate park did not help them do what they thought their intention was. And here's where it gets weird, because I feel like the modern day church is often selling the same thing that Disney's trying to sell. And that's where it gets strange. And that's where, from the third party observer perspective, I actually think that there's a lot of critiques that could be made to the modern day church. And I say that as a person who's a part of it, that I think are really accurate to what he's trying to describe. But I don't think that that's a function of, I think he's doing a good job of explaining this too. That's not a function of the original intent of Christ and being a Christ follower and believing what that means. That is an outgrowth, as what Slimer said, of what consumerism means in the modern day, and the church adapting to consumerism, as opposed to the church saying, we're not going to do the consumerism thing, we're going to keep doing the Christian thing. So it's a pretty good observation, both by Slimer and by the host here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, everything is captured by whatever the economic mechanism is with which the globe operates in. Everything's captured by it, and to try to operate outside of it it can be bad. I mean, like, okay, so like, for example, like, let's say this, I'm going to give you an example. So the purpose of a missionary is to reach as many people as possible, to tell them about the teachings of Jesus. If you deliberately choose to reject, to use the commodification of the teachings of Jesus, so that way you can reach more people, and deliberately choose to go against that, you are now going against the teachings, because now you're reaching less people.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's now, are you doing an immoral thing by not operating within the system of, you know, the capitalist structure? Like, so for example, a guy that's running a mega church, we can argue about, you know, if he's in it for his own financial self-interest or if he's actually a really humble servant of God. That's not what I'm talking about here. But if that person genuinely believes they're reaching the largest amount of people by buying TV air and spending millions of dollars in ways to make it more relatable, then to him, you know, he is doing exactly what he was taught to do. And that's, I think, something worth discussing, maybe not for this video, but that is what I'm saying, is this is all a byproduct of how we operate in this current economic system, and that it's maybe not right, but it is what it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Christianity. From the 60s on, hundreds of New Age religions flourished among free-thinking boomers, almost always with economic tie-ins in the form of healing spas, crystals, and radio stations. In this way, as sociologist Peter L. Berger has observed, religious institutions become marketing agencies, and the religious traditions become consumer commodities. And a good deal of religious activity comes to be dominated.
I thought that was the penguin at first. I'm like, wait a minute.
Economies. In recent years, as Missouri and Coda note,
By the logic
line
of
between
economy,
religious activities and commercial activities has become increasingly blurry, with unexpected crossovers between the two realms, and everything from Christian MLMs to Jewish dating sites. Increasingly, people like the fourth best Hollywood Chris will identify not as religious, but as spiritual, a term that is inherently looser and can be conducive to a sort of grab bag approach to spirituality. Mazur and Coda concur. Writing of Disney, they have entered the market at a time when many people are not only searching for alternatives to traditional religion, but are also flexible with what they find. So maybe the answer ultimately is that Disney is fulfilling functions of religion, such as religious institutions fulfill functions like fun and entertainment that are typically associated with Disney. So Disney's not necessarily becoming more like religion. Religion might just be becoming more like Disney.
Interesting.
And nowhere is this bizarre paradox more apparent than at one of the country's many Jesus-themed parks. Then again,
pause it real
maybe
quick?
we should
Yeah,
say
I got
this
you.
is strange at
So
all.
I
like
love
how-
that point.
I also like how we came to that conclusion before he gave away the conclusion.
Yeah, that's very, very true. Absolutely, absolutely. Do you want to elaborate before we move on somewhere? Or,
That's all I want to say.
Because capitalism as an economic theory has actually never been totally free from religion.
Yeah.
Philosopher Walter Benjamin famously said that a religion may be discerned in capitalism. That is to say, capitalism serves essentially to allay the same anxieties, torments, and disturbances to which the so-called religions offered answers, which basically means that capitalism isn't just an economic system, but a set of beliefs that aims to offer meaning and purpose to modern life. But rather than offering the hope, peace, and justice often promised by religion, according to Benjamin, capitalism is a religion which offers us not the reform of existence, but its complete destruction. It is the expansion of despair until despair becomes a religious state of the world in the hope that this will lead to salvation. In this context, all kinds of profit-driven institutions could be seen as doing something similar, i.e., offering their own solutions to problems previously thought to be the realm of religion. Whether you're preserving your Hello Kitty lunchbox behind a wall of glass, worshiping at the altar of your favorite CrossFit instructor, praying with your model hot pastor at an evangelical megachurch, or spending your whole paycheck at Disney's Animal Kingdom, which, why? It's the saddest place in the world because it's like a zoo, but there's no way they're taking care of it the same way you would take care of a zoo. It makes me feel bad. Don't go to Animal Kingdom. No matter what, just about every
Shots
major
fired,
institution
dude.
you're engaging with is inevitably short.
I do not get that. I know he was like kind of joking, but like, what does he mean by that? I mean, Disney takes such good care of those animals.
I was going to say, my wife is like super conservationist, and she's like, Disney does a better job than most zoos in the country. So I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, that was an extremely ill-informed opinion on his part for sure. I was like,
Exactly.
doesn't make any sense. And it's also the best park at Walt Disney World, hands down. So
It lights towards the goodness of our one true God, capital. And as for Disney adults, Are they part of a religion? Nah, not by our estimations. But are they an excellent example of the porousness between consumerism and spirituality that characterizes this moment in time? Almost certainly. But the good thing is, unless you're the type of person who uses up all your yearly vacation days.
But that's the beauty of Disney in a lot of ways. The brilliance behind Disney is that Seymour, you talked about a lot. We talked about a lot on a lot of our financial episodes and stuff. But Disney has been around for over 100 years because it knows how to evolve. Disney was the quintessential company in the 1950s when it was in the 1950s. And now in 2025, it's exactly what people need now. That's because Disney knows how to evolve with times and stay relevant. And that's why companies like Sears and other things that have gone out of business are out of business, and Disney is still thriving because Disney knows how to kind of maneuver. You know what I'm saying? It's essential to survival. And that's why if you put any of these Disney purists that you see like on X and stuff running this company, it'd be gone in a year.
Yeah.
It'd be gone in a year. You know what I'm saying?
Trips to Anaheim and Orlando, you are in the clear. I guess unless you're really into Star Wars, because that's Disney now. Or if you've enjoyed the 29 or so MCU movies and the growing number of MCU TV shows, which are produced by Disney and available on Disney Plus. But hey, if you're like a sports person, then you're good, except for Disney owns ESPN. So every time you watch Stephen A. Smith lay down a hot take, you're still playing right into the hands of the mouse. Oh God. Okay. At least I still have my guilty pleasure, The Bachelor, and its related properties. Which
there you go.
Damn it, they're on ABC, which is owned by Disney. Jesus Christ, Jesus Mouse, or Mickey Christ. I don't even know anymore. So maybe we're just all Disney adults now, whether you realize it or not.
There you go.
But what do you think? Do you welcome your mouse-eared overlord?
And I love how he kept the tag on. That's so capitalist-like. Perfect touch. Perfect touch.
Or do we still have a chance to eke out our own spiritual identities? Let us know in the comments. Thanks to our patrons for all.
Great video again from Wisecrack. I just want to give a big shout out to him. Make sure everybody at home subscribe to him. But Jay, go ahead, brother.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think there's this really interesting commentary at the end there that sort of got glossed over a little bit. I don't remember which philosopher said it, but there's a quote from Jesus, right? And Jesus says, "It is harder for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is harder sorry, I'm getting it totally wrong. It is more difficult for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle." Now, camel going through an eye of a needle is impossible, right? Because the eye of a needle is tiny, and camels are huge. So why is Jesus saying that? One of the things that I find really fascinating about the way that this video ends is it starts to talk about the relationship we have to capitalism and capitalism being a savior. And Jesus literally gives you the warning in the beginning in his teachings when he says, you can actually get to be so wealthy that you feel like you can get all of your needs met via the money that you spend and expend. But the one thing you can't get your need met around is what happens to your soul. And so it's interesting that they end the video that way, and then kind of like, it's almost like they say, well, church has become really consumerist. And we all said, yes, it has become super consumerist, but it doesn't actually go back to the core tenets of the spiritual belief to actually see what it said about capitalism. So it's this weird kind of like we're circling around this thing of like, what we're really asking in this video is, does Disney mimic a modern day religion in its approach to selling happiness? And we all said it does, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, but it doesn't. What it's not doing is it's not saying, does it actually have any of the core tenets of major world religions? He didn't bring up Buddhism at all, pretty much, right? And there's a lot to be said there, right? Like there's, I could make an argument that Disney, it plays in these. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and this is, if you guys have time to hang out, because this is going into a completely different direction. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Religions either tend to go more towards the realm of ego death, where the way that I feel, the way that I am centric is not as I should try and tone that down. I am not the center of the universe. I am not trying to make myself God. I should just accept what is and be in tune with what is. Or they tend to go with, what's the definition of how I make myself worthy of the thing that I could achieve? Eternal life, nirvana. What did you call the one, Slimer?
Like escaping the wheel of samsara.
Yes, exactly. And so there's these two kind of thought processes that in some ways tend to butt up against one another, right? I should give up myself. No, I shouldn't give up myself. I should try to be the best me, right? And there's these two conflicting narratives. Like, one is morality based about how I make myself worthy, kind of hero's journey-ish, right, Slimer? The other one is more of a how do I relinquish my worthiness to just live and be who I am, right? By the way, one of the reasons I'm a Christ follower is because I think it really artfully blends the two of those things together in a way that's really meaningful to me personally. But the just for the recognition, the video is not actually trying to address any of those topics. It's really just trying to relate, what do we see as a modern day religious practice being, and does Disney practice some of these things as well? Yeah. So it's an interesting kind of take on it. But yeah, thanks for letting me join the conversation, because I love this kind of stuff.
Oh, me too. This is amazing stuff. I mean, this is really, really cool. And it's cool to dive into this and kind of like break it down with you guys, you know? And that's why I love what we do here on OG55, you know? Like, this is crazy stuff. This is like deep divey, you know? We did that first one. It was more about cult. Like, is Disney a cult, right, Slimer? And we're like, after that video, we're like, okay, Slimer was like, there's a part 2. I'm like, okay, consider it done. We're doing it. Consider it done. We're doing it. You know. So, is there a part 3 or no? Is this it?
No, that's it. I have seen that some other YouTubers have made response videos to this. Some of them have been criticisms, but no, there is no part 3. You can really explore all of this if you just pick up some really good books, as it pertains to not just religion and morality, but of course, you know, Disney itself and Disney. Like I said in the last video, Disney adults is a new phenomenon in terms of like the history of the world. It is because it is a synthesis of because of the capitalist economic system which we live, which is relatively new considering the entire timeline of civilizations. But then like the fandom behind a corporation, which again, corporations are a new concept because it didn't exist prior to the Renaissance. This is a Renaissance idea. And the fact that it is so robust and sustainable and so large, and it is so, like you said, OG, porous and malleable, that you can actually use it in completely different parts of the world with completely different belief systems. Yeah, it's crazy. And that's why Disney's been around for 102 years. Now, I think a lot of that doesn't have to do with its malleability, but how Disney is as a company now says more about its malleability and its ability to navigate itself to profits where profits otherwise were not possible even 30 and 40 years ago. But I really like Jay's statement about how the commodification and commercialization of religion is intrinsically tied with capitalism, and Disney is pretty much captured in that same web. Like you just you just can't get out of it. It's impossible. It's like trying to be a social person by only living and talking to yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, no, 100%. Now, the one thing that I'm at issue with like the term Disney adult is it implies that this company or this studio or this brand is for kids, and that you have to kind of differentiate between like the fans. So now you're a Disney adult, which is like this kind of like other weird thing. Like you're because you know you don't hear universal adults, right, or whatever. So it's like this weird kind of thing where it's like it's a company made for kids, but you're like here's this group of adults who like it too, right? And I'm at issue with that just because I don't feel. Look, I have a lot of criticisms about Disney adults. I've mentioned many of them here in this video, you know, but that's one thing I disagree with a lot of the critics, where this company is just for kids, or these theme parks are just for kids. There's a lot you can take from the Disney theme park experience that is not just for kids. I mean, you can go in there if you appreciate architecture, you know what I'm saying? Storytelling. I mean, these are all things you can pull from the Disney park experience. It's not all just for kids. And I think that people that say that kind of stuff, they're really ignorant of what Disney is. It's never been just for kids.
I was just gonna say, I don't know why it's only Disney though, right?
Right.
Where we have other fan bases, other areas, like even like Nintendo, right, where it's multi-generational, and you don't hear a adult like a Nintendo adult or adult Nintendo. You don't hear that. You just simply like Nintendo. I don't know why it's not the same thing for Disney, especially now when it's like the whole flywheel is diverse with different business.
Yeah.
But
No, well said.
exactly like at the end of the video talking about how everything's owned by Disney now.
Yeah, pretty much. Exactly.
Well, this is the hypocrisy of the term Disney adult as it applies to non-children adults that are really into Disney, because first and foremost, what it does, it makes a sweeping generalization that everybody that likes Disney is doing Disney the same way. You know, Jay might be really into the stories. OG's really into the parks. Seymour's really into the financial sector aspect of it. I mean, so what are we all practicing infantilism at a degree there? Like, where is it? I don't see it. And then to strictly associate infantilism to Disney, I think what that does, it's a little bit of it's kind of dishonest, right? Because every adult, unless you're like, I mean, like unless you're in Ukraine, you just don't have the luxury to do it. Everybody enjoys the ageless, timeless pleasures, and I don't mean like pleasures in some kind of like a pejorative, but like just there's just things that are just ageless and timeless, like being happy.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, exactly.
Having a good time with your family and friends, enjoying the spectacle that you know, the Imagineers bring with fireworks. I don't suspect that people say that people are acting infantile or embracing infantile practices when they enjoy the fireworks for 4th of July. So when we do it at Walt Disney World and we have some musical undertones and some storytelling, why does it all of a sudden become that, right? So there is a double standard there. And while there are Disney fans who do act like children, they do suffer from problems, right? These are those people that I you know, we said earlier, they're emotionally underdeveloped and they have trauma issues. They go a lot farther than just what we're talking about here. But yeah, and like Seymour said, just because you you know, you dress like a Disney fan, it's not. It's, you know, Jay, what I actually said in the last video is it's funny that Disney hasn't been able to break out of this criticism. But then when you think about like Star Wars took the better part of 40 years to break out of this because it was such a niche fandom. Even though it was really big and it was a global thing, it was still very niche. I mean, like in high school, you got beat up if you like Star Wars. Yeah. But then once Hollywood figured out how to monetize it, well, then all of a sudden it's like, well, you know, didn't you know that Star Wars is like the greatest and coolest thing?
Yeah, now it's cool. Now it's cool to like it, you know, and it ebbs and flows. And that's the cool thing too about the Disney, the parks in particular, is that you can go really, and I was talking to George about this recently, where depending on who you go with, it dictates your experience. So if I'm going with my kids, that's a different experience than if like a bunch of friends who are like single are going, right? Like because like you can go to Disney and have a very adult experience. You can you can go to the bars, you can do very adult things, but you can also go with your family and ride Peter Pan and check out the parades and do things that are more kid friendly. But like that's the beauty of these parks, is that you could have drastically different experiences. You can tailor make your experience, you know? And that's why I'm very much against this idea that these places and this brand is just for kids. It really isn't. It literally is what you make it. You know, so
well, it goes. I mean, there is a really funny reel that Seymour sent us, where the guy is going, "Oh, these Disney adults, they're such losers. Like, let's see how much they spent on merchandise, and he cuts and he goes, oops, wrong screen. It's like sports spending, right?
Right.
And so, we're not calling anybody a Lakers adult. We're not calling anybody, Yankees adult, and we don't call them those things. I think that, So I think that the problem is that, let's be honest, Disney got themselves into this boat a little bit because they do. Walt catered to the families, but he said, there's a clip of Walt saying, we're also for the oldsters. So a lot of people that come to the part are oldsters, right? So it wasn't that he was saying, I want to create an environment that people of all ages can find innocence and value and fun in, right? And I think, though, that like Disney over time, because of that strategy that Walt articulated that said, I would like to share with kids the way that I think the world should work and some of the ways that I see the world and the way I see the U.S. and those kind of things. Because of that, they created the Disney Afternoon. And we all grew up watching the Disney Afternoon, and we all love the Disney. So there's this thing that, like, because we grew up with Disney being a big part of our lives, then it's like, well, you didn't grow out of it, almost like a thing, right? And because of that, there's this. I think that there's actually, they said that Disney was didn't play with classes, but people outside the Disney sphere definitely play with classes, because they're saying, like, you didn't grow up, so now you're a lower class. You're not adapting as well to the world as I did. Therefore, you must be a weirdo Disney adult, right? So it's used as like a pejorative in that manner that just doesn't really make any sense. I think what most people are reacting to they're reacting to those folks who we all know, some of them, who do tend to put Disney in a religious place where if they don't get to go to Disney, they might not be okay for the next 2 weeks, right? Or whatever. And I think that they're looking for Disney to save them, if we're going to say it that way, right? And I do think that that's who they're mostly referring to, because I guarantee you most of the people who complain about Disney, if they were to go with the four of us, would have a fantastic time. Right? Like, so, it's one of those things. But.
Yeah, no, you're right. The people that are like, that can't go 2 weeks without it, people that are climbing the walls during the pandemic because they're not at Disney. I was fine with not, like, during the pandy, it was actually kind of like a welcome break. There's no parks. I can kind of like have like a reset moment a little bit with these things, you know what I'm saying? Because for me personally, as much as I love Disney, I mean, I started a whole YouTube channel based on it. I love it to death, but I need those breaks though. Like, I can't live and soak and stew in it like 24/7. Like, I need other shit going on. You know what I'm saying? And but you're right, Jay. The people that have that where you can't break from that, and you start to really feel like it's almost like you were saying, Slimer, like an addiction, where you feel like I'm not mentally okay without it. That's a problem. Yeah, that's a huge problem. There's underlying.
It is a very difficult line to determine.
Yeah,
because I think all of us would agree that that the human body needs rest and renewal to a degree. Right. And so Disney is a place where you can get a form of rest and renewal, because it is trying to remove some of the problems that we face on a daily basis. So the question is, like, if you're using Disney, it's almost I think the best analogy is the one you used, OG, where it's like you can have a drink now and again, but if you're drinking 12 beers a night, that's a problem, right?
That's a problem, yeah.
Yeah, so it's I think, and by the way, Disney is not alone in this. Anything can take that over in your life.
Yes.
Other people can. You can fall in love with other people to the point where you're obsessed with them, which is not in a good way. So it can be other businesses. It can be, there's lots of ways that people can gravitate towards things that they begin to worship. Or I think a better way of saying it is, you can make an idol out of lots of things. And if that thing is your idol, right? And you have to go to the well of that idol to get what you need from it. Now you're creating a very damaging thing for you, probably, right? And we all deal with that to some degree. There's no way that any of us could say, I have no idols. You know what I mean? Like, no, we all have certain things that we face in life that we're working on, that we're working through. And so I don't want anybody to assume that they can't use Disney as like a good way to escape sometimes. But it's just, again, how much are you putting into it?
Yeah, it's like the Jedi, right? The attachment, the attachment element is kind of the root cause of a lot of misery, and potentially goes down the dark side. Go ahead, Slimer.
That's really good, and I think that Disney, just like anything else, should be treated like a tool. Use the tool for whatever it is that you need it for, and then once you have achieved that, you don't continue to return to the well of your idol, if you will. Now, Walt Disney, very creative person, but he inspired people to be creative, and they even say in the parks over the speakers, dreamers. They address you as dreamers, and they tell you to go dream. They tell you to go inspire. They tell you to be imaginative and be the best person, the best version of yourself. They're literally telling you that if you've gotten what you need from us, if we've inspired you, so that way you can go into the world and bring goodwill, do something that is going to positively impact the lives of other people, then we have, and this is actually the creatives that are speaking about this, right? So like what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to humanize what it is that the real people behind the Disney company are actually trying to inspire other people to do, because they are trying to communicate with you through the expression of art and through the different ways of the different styles of art, whether it's music, animation, whatever, for you to go out and do things that have made them a more whole person. Okay. And you have to be able to be aware of that and notice that this is being communicated to you, but then self-reflect and then try to achieve whatever that thing is that the Disney Imagineers were trying to tell you as a kid or even as an adult. If it's something that you need to hear as an adult, it doesn't really matter what the time frame is in your life, as long as you start acting on the thing that's going to make you a more whole, better person, or better contributor to society. But yeah, I do look at Disney as like a tool in that kind of a sense. And if you don't need it anymore, throw it away. If you continue to need it, that's fine. But just recognize that there are limitations as to the kind of joy it's going to bring you, and that eventually you're going to have to look internally and stop looking externally to the things that are going to make you a happier person from the inside out.
Yeah, because you kind of get into it's like a toxic relationship almost with Disney. Some people get into this thing where it's like, because they're so dependent on Disney providing them happiness, they get into this thing where it's like, that's when it sort of like gets into this thing where they can't control Disney. Now and then they get mad at Disney, right? So it's like, oh, you're removing my rivers of America. Now you're messing with my happiness, and that's when the toxic stuff kind of comes out, right? Where it's like, now it's like someone is so dependent on Disney providing happiness that when they do something that runs counter to that, they get really pissed off, and it's a whole big thing. And it's like, so yeah, people need to understand, like, yes, like you were saying, Slimer, Disney is a tool. Use it, to be your happy place and go to and enjoy it. But you can't be so attached to it and have it be literally your everything, where when they're doing things and making business decisions, it's literally causing you to spiral. That's where it becomes a problem. You know what I'm saying? So great conversation, guys. Great conversation. We will definitely do more of these kinds. I love this stuff. I absolutely love this stuff. Slimer, I want to thank you so much, brother, for sticking it out with us. I know it's late by you. I'll start with you, brother. Where can everybody at home find you on social media, sir?
Yeah, hey, and thanks again. Really enjoyed this conversation. I do like long-form discussions. I think that in order for there to be fruitful conversations, you got to create the space for ideas to unravel. And I don't like short script stuff. So if you also don't like short script stuff and you enjoy deep conversations, make sure you check out Orange Go 55. So you can find me here, and on X you can find me on Slime Square 84, where I do very short scripts posts. That's a Post and Ghost. It's time for me.
Post and Ghost. I like that. Post and Ghost. Mr. Seymour Duck, it's also laid over by you, sir. I do want to thank you for joining. Is the weather improving over there finally, or is it still like a total?
No, it's bad.
Oh, Seymour.
That's why I'm doing Uber everything, because I'm not going outside in the snow.
I'll send you some sunshine, buddy.
You gotta move to either Florida or California, Seymour.
Yeah, but the cost of living isn't so bad here. So
he's moving to Thailand. He's moving to Thailand, baby.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'd rather move there. Yeah.
You need a roommate, bro?
Yeah, I actually looked up $400 for a condo with everything furnished. I'm like, that's not bad.
Not
And I
bad,
think there
not
was a
bad.
7-Eleven in the lobby too. So
Oh man.
Oh, that's like super convenient, dude. That's crazy convenient. That's wild. Where can
oh,
everybody
yeah.
find? Oh, go ahead. I'm
Thanks for
sorry.
having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Where can everybody find you on social media, Mr. Duck?
Yeah, you can find me at mrduck.social with all my social media links, including Threads, Instagram, and X. And actually, I was just looking up because they mentioned in the video the Jesus Park. I was looking up the Holy Land
yeah.
Experience.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, it got closed down on August 2021.
It did.
Yeah, they bulldoze it.
Yeah, that
Yep.
was a thing.
Yep, it was a thing. Mr. Jay Sherer, thank you for joining us, brother. I love having you on the show more lately. It's been a really good time. Where can everybody find you on social media, sir?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Great topic. Loved it. We've been going 2 hours and 20 minutes almost, and every single moment was fun. So always a pleasure doing a show with you guys. I always feel like I want to hear more from Seymour, but I won't shut up enough to hear from him. So I love Seymour's takes. Everybody can find me at How Stories Work with Jay Sherer. Again, talking about mostly writing, storytelling, filmmaking, directing, those kind of things. I'm just trying to learn to be a better one of all of those things: storyteller, filmmaker, director, writer. So if you want to do that and do that with me, come along at How Stories Work with Jay Sherer, or catch me right here on Orange Grove 55 with the Story Geek Show, where we're usually digging deeper into some topic of some kind. We did a show recently on movies that are cult classics, why they're cult classics, and which ones we liked best. So you'll learn a little bit more about OG and George and I if you watch that video, because you'll go, wait, they like what movies? What movies?
Yeah. And I'll link that video at the very end of this one. So make sure you guys stick around. Stick around for the end screen card and check that one out. It's a great video about cult classics. Really good stuff.
Yeah, and I think the thing we can take from this video, by the way, I always know that we're doing a really good show because I start to take notes. I'm like, oh, I gotta capture some notes.
Yes.
But secular tunism, that was one of the terms that was used in there. So that seems like, I don't know, that seems like maybe the Toontown motto, secular tunism.
Exactly.
Like anyway.
As opposed to religious tunism, right? Like, why even preface it with secular unless there's like religious tunism? So why don't we just call it tunism, because cartoons didn't exist in like, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I just didn't look at the right cave painting. You know what I mean?
The right cave painting. I love that. Thank you all so much.
They're gonna find a cave painting with the 3 circles, and they're gonna go, "Oh my gosh, Mickey Mouse is
That's
that
it,
old."
100%.
They predicted Mickey. There's actually a cool meme of like there's this Mayan statue of like this dude. He's got his head back. It looks like he's like super high. And then there's a picture like of Lil Wayne right next to him. And the meme is the Mayans predicted Lil Wayne.
That's awesome.
It's chef kiss perfect. I'll send it to you, gentlemen. Actually, when it comes to memes in the DMs, Seymour is the absolute king.
Oh,
I mean, he is
amazing.
Seymour's amazing. Absolutely hilarious stuff. But thank you so much for watching, everybody, this episode of OG55. Stick around, check out that cult classic video. And until the next time, see you later.
Thank you for watching OG55. If you aren't already, consider becoming a member today.